I want to, before I get into the verbiage here, I want to recognize that we have a pretty good crowd here and remind the crowd that be courteous and respectful as we have these discussions. I also want to recognize that we have Jessica Brennan, former chair of the school board and the trustee, and now is the chair of the Darts board, and she's here. I know that Mark Mindorf, the executive director for Darts, is here. Is there any other board members that I'm missing? Carolyn Fernandez. Kim is here as well. So these are the board members of Darts. And I want to thank, and I believe a lot of the other people in the audience may be employed by Darts. Is that correct? If you're employed by Darts, put your hands up. So here we are. So obviously there's a very keen interest from not only the workers and the people that provide such an excellent service to our city, but we also have a number of people here are actual clients of the Darts system as well, and so we appreciate them being here as well, listening with great interest in respect to this presentation. So thank you all. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Members of the public are advised that our meetings are webcast live by City of Hamilton and temporarily archived on the city's website. Other individuals and the media may also be audibly and or visually recording this meeting. As well, a reminder that all electronic devices are to be switched to a non-audible function during council meetings. Madam Clerk, is there any changes to the agenda?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, through you, added as item 3.1 are the minutes of Friday's GIC meeting from January 29th.
May I have a motion to approve the agenda as amended? Moved by Councillor Pearson, second by Councillor Partridge. All those in favour? Any opposed? Carried. Declarations of interest? Seeing none, everyone's interested. 5 staff presentations, and we have Public Works Department proposed 2016 operating budget. At this point, I'd like to invite Jerry Davis and David Dixon to provide the presentation for the Public Works Committee.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll start off the presentation, and then Dave will come in with respect to 2 items. So the content for today is the department overview. Now, the package you received is very substantial, 260 slides. So I'm covering the first 28 slides, which is the department overview. At the back of that, you have each divisional budget within Public Works, but it's for information for you to review. We're not going through every one of those slides today, so we're not doing 260 slides, but all of the accomplishments, any challenges, and all the metrics, the performance measures that each division does is included in those in the information you have. So the first part of it, the department overview, as I mentioned, I will do that. Then the transit 10-year plan, again, this was approved by council last year. Dave Dixon will come up and do this. And again, there's about 45 slides, but really it's the last 10 or 12 slides that he will be going over with you. And then we have the ATS delivery, which Dave will also be reviewing with you. So again, so to get into it, again, this is, has been the model for the strategic service delivery and will be updated. We've been presenting this each year, and going into 2016, we will be looking at updating the strategic plan. This has been the driving factors for delivering our program and services for the last 4 years. And again, we break it into both strategic and to operating initiatives.
Oh, okay.
So the overview,
sorry. Jerry, sorry, I just had some information I provided in respect to Public Works Department Transit Division presentation, and there's some footnotes in it, and I was only given several copies, so I just hand them up. We'll get extra copies for sure.
Mr. Deputy Mayor, is this something that's on today's agenda?
I believe so. Yes.
The clerk's office doesn't have a copy.
Fair enough. I was just handing them in before I just handed them before I got here. So,
Jerry, can you clarify what?
Through the, I'm not sure what you have.
So, Madam Chair or Madam Clerk, can I get? I think I got another one here. Can I get extra copies of this?
I see
So
it.
this is a presentation that's being made today, as I understand it.
Stephanie, can I see it?
I want to make sure, because it didn't come through staff, that
No.
it's online, it's been made available to the public, that it's
So-
not different than what's in here, or it really...
Fair enough. And so this is the presentation with footnotes from the DARTS committee in regards to, like, footnotes on some of the issues for the attention of the committee to consider.
Okay, that,
So I need more copies, yeah,
I can't do it now, I'm in the meeting.
fair enough.
And it's not, I don't have copies for the public, and it's not online, so I'm just trying to confirm why
Okay,
staff didn't
so
provide this
if you want,
today.
wish, you can hand them back to me. Want to do it that way?
Discussing?
Go ahead, Councillor.
I'd just like to
So
know,
that's-
trying to
are these
understand the
documents that
context,
are
sir.
produced by DARTS, or is it come through clerks?
The presentation is produced by city, by
who?
by Mr. Dixon, and
Through you to Dave, what is this document, Dave?
So if I could, I glanced at it briefly. It's David's presentation, but there's been notes added by a third party, not by Public Works Department.
DARTS. Correct. Correct. Yep, go ahead.
Mr. Deputy Mayor, could I kindly and courteously ask, why weren't 16 copies made, please?
Sorry.
You only gave out to half the table.
Yeah, that's all I had on me, so we need more. But I will get, I was just handing them before I came in.
No,
I was
I
just trying to
appreciate-
distribute what I had.
But again, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I need to follow this. Director Dixon, is this your document, please, through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor? Right here.
Through the chair, I believe this is my document extracted from Jerry's presentation with annotations added to it.
Correct.
So through you, Mr. Deputy
DARTS.
Mayor,
Do I have the floor? Thank you. I thought you were finished, Councillor Ferguson. My apologies. I'll relinquish the floor by once you
Sorry,
come back to
Councillor
me,
Ferguson,
please.
you do have the floor.
Yeah, thank you. So I was just curious, is this a special interest group that put these notations on, or how did this all, is this an official document from the city? Should we consider it, or should we just park it? So you, to Mr. Dixon.
Through the chair, this is not an official document from the city.
Who put the notations on it, the red notations?
I think I
Through you to Mr. Dixon.
Through the chair, I do not know, Councillor.
Okay, I'll relinquish it. I'm done.
So as a board member of DARTS, I can tell you that they went through the presentation, and there are notes in the presentation that was provided through DARTS for consideration. You can ignore the information. It's just I thought this was all about ensuring that we have as much information. I don't think we have 16 copies, so we need to get 16 copies. I was just trying to provide a service by giving out what I had.
So it came from the DARTS board then, did it?
Correct. Well, from DARTS.
through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I'm sorry. Anything that's coming as written correspondence from an outside body needs to go to the February 9th meeting. This is not on the agenda. Nobody's aware. We didn't
Fair
accept it
enough.
through changes to the agenda. If it's considered a written submission from the DARTS board, it's not a staff presentation. It really shouldn't be before committee today. It should be provided either at Public Works if it's with respect to how DARTS operates. If it's specific to the budget, then with all the other delegations and written submissions, I would be happy to put it on the February 9th agenda so that it can be considered before, but it's being added in a...
Fair enough.
Is that
I was just
okay?
asked to hand it
All
out, and
right.
that's what I did. So sorry about that.
That's okay.
Councillor Ferguson's finished. Councillor Jackson.
You're finished, Councillor Lloyd Ferguson. Thank you. I concur with the legislative assistant, Mr. Deputy Mayor, through to General Manager Davis. Jerry, would you just confirm that that is what's happened? Because if this is from Director Dixon, we just need to know that, and all 16 of us would have been nice to have a copy. But if it is as the legislative assistant has said and what Councillor Whitehead has said from the DARTS board, can you just provide some further clarity, please?
Well, through the chair, the document that's being referred to, it's the first time I've seen it today, and it wasn't produced by Public Works Department for our presentation today.
Okay, thank you, Jerry. Mr. Deputy Mayor, with all due fairness, I haven't even got a copy, and those who got it 2 minutes ago. I don't even have a chance to read potentially what the information or the counter information is. So quite honestly, I appreciate what you were trying to do, but I'm just disappointed in the way this has been handled. Thank you.
Yes, so we're going to collect what was given, and we'll keep them for the presentation on the 19th, I think. So we're collecting them right now, sorry. Councillor? They're being collected, right?
Mr. Deputy Mayor, I gotta say, we're off to a bit of a rough start with this meeting, sir, respectfully. I'm a little bit concerned with the emphasis being put on this particular item, given that you're the chair, you're on the board. It feels like we've already in this big 200-slide presentation of Public Works that we're giving undue emphasis and attention to a group, started with your opening statements. And I'm just wondering respectfully, without challenging the chair, might it be appropriate that for this particular one, you maybe just relinquish the chair to somebody else to be able to deal with this in a way that provides a certain level of equity for all the other items that are on this list. And I say that respectfully. I'm not challenging the chair, but I just feel like we've gotten off to a bit of a rough start here.
Councillor Partridge.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think, following Stephanie, our clerk's suggestions, we should just collect everything. It's not part of today's agenda. I'm very disturbed that there's comments on this, additional comments from an outside third party made on this presentation. This is a public meeting, and the public does not have access to that information, and that's wrong. So I just respectfully, I think the process is very flawed when it's rolled out like this. And to those in the audience, please go through our clerk's department. You can't just walk over and hand anything to somebody around this table. Go to the clerk's department. That's why we have them. Thank you.
Thank you. So duly noted. Let's be clear. It was handed to me before. I didn't realize how many copies I had, and then when I started handing them out, I realized I didn't have enough. So I would certainly apologize for that. I believe that the reports have all been collected and will be presented if they make a delegation status for the budget process in the near future. So I hope that solves it. It's no longer in front of us. No one's had a chance to go through it, and it's no longer a material. So at this point, Councillor Green.
Respectfully, Mr. Chair, I did have some concerns that I raised about the emphasis being put on this particular item. They weren't addressed by yourself. I'm just wondering if we found remedy to those comments.
I think my role is to be impartial, and I think I can be impartial in the chair. Thank you. Councillor, so we'll go on and move forward with Mr. Davis's presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the Public Works Department, what we have here is, it shows the overall divisions, and it's comprised of the 6 divisions as identified, and you'll see in the gray shaded areas are lighter, Hamilton Water. So that's the rate budget which was approved in December, which Hamilton Water is part of the Public Works Department. And again, all the services that are provided are identified by the different service level programs. So challenges, I'm not going to go through all of them. I'll talk about some of the key ones. Waterfront development, this is a council priority, and the emphasis here is to be development ready in 2018. The Public Works Department's portion of this is implementing the strategic initiatives and the capital improvements, such as the shoreline, the breakwater. A 10-year service plan, transit service plan. Again, David's going to talk to you after my presentation about this. Going down through it, the operating impacts from growth. This is a continual impact on the operating. When a new subdivision is created, we have to provide services, winter maintenance, garbage collection, street lighting, street maintenance. So again, these drive the incremental operating costs for the program. Just going down, the Emerald Ash Borer program, you're familiar with that. It's on a 10-year cycle where we have the significant impact of the trees, and we have a good program in place for that, but we're trying to stay ahead of the damage that is occurring. And again, I'm not going to go through all of them, but it's identified also in the budget book. So the department as a whole, we have a total of 2,264 FTE. And again, you can see Hamilton Water was approved already. But again, the 6 divisions in total and the respective directors for those divisions. The other thing that was asked is on distributed staff. So you can see in public affairs, we have 1 communications officer, In the finance and admin staff, we have 44, and in human resources, there's 8 associates. And again, these are all part of they're funded through the Public Works Department, but their direct reports are their home departments. So highlights, you have a 10-year transit strategy that was approved. We're bringing the update today. Some of the key things, and all of these highlights are identified in the individual divisional budgets. I've just pulled out a few of them for you to get a sense of the significant services we provide through the Public Works Department. And these are things that collectively the Public Works Committee, GIC and Council have endorsed over the year, and we've been able to bring this forward. Key one there, the Pan Am Games was there. Multiple asphalt road, sidewalk, concrete sidewalk, curb repair contracts. We have, in operations and engineering service, we're looking at bundling projects, which will make the technology that much greater as we deliver the service. The noise wall on the Lincoln Alexander Parkway, again, this was aesthetics, but it looks great if you go by it. The dash cam technology and waste management was very good. We can look at how the drivers are handling the vehicles in that. And again, the beautiful alleyways, again, this is something that the community is really looking forward to, so we've been working on it to ensure we can bring it forward, because with the intensification, alleyways are becoming a significant part of the community. I talked about MRAS 4. One of the key initiatives due to the impact of growth is Parks East was split into 2 districts, East and South. So we now have the 4 districts within the city to address the growth. And you'll see after this year's winter, the operations department roads will be moving in the same direction to address the needs of the community. The East District is massive, and that's where all the growth is, Ward 9, Ward 11. And so we're looking at restructuring there to provide the better level of service. Again, the bike share program, very successful this year. We launched it. We did a soft launch in the winter. It went through the summer. There's been a great pickup on it. The Tim Hortons Field, while it still is an ongoing issue, it has been a great facility for the community, and it's a well-received new stadium that we're utilizing. And completed the operational review of Confederation Park. This is very important in that what we've done is we've split the Wild Waterworks from the park operations in order to try and establish a reserve for the ongoing maintenance of the Wild Waterworks. So this was approved by Council just in the last few months. Stable natural gas pricing, 0 budget increase from 2014 to 2015. Jeff Lupton will be doing an update on all of our energy issues and the cost the cash savings we have, as well as cost avoidance. The Traffic Management Center has been constructed. This is a great facility in that right now we can program, I believe it's over 100 traffic signals from the location, with the eventual option to get everything done through that. It's a great success for us. State of the infrastructure report, again, we continue to update this. It's critical to address all the infrastructure within the city. This has been the first 2 bullets. We've had successful intervention at the OEB regarding our streetlight rates, and this is it's something that staff have worked along with legal and public works tirelessly on. And again, we're working with our shareholder Horizon in trying to ensure that we have an effective rate, especially when we're moving towards LED lights. And then the other one is the CRTC application for Bell Canada. We want to ensure when we're in the right-of-way and when any utility is going to put their plant in our right-of-way, that we know where it's going and it's being coordinated effectively. This hasn't been the case in the past. And the city of Hamilton is on the cutting edge, out there challenging that utilities can't just go in the right-of-way. We have to let them in, but we want to coordinate it. So in 2016 are the initiatives coming up. Again, the service enhancements that are approved by Council. Again, what we did is we looked at what were our deficiencies in the system. We addressed our standards, and we're looking at the growth that's hitting the community and how do we deliver that. We've worked with the Mohawk College in completing the terminal up there. That's been a great partnership. The AVL tracking for the system, waste collection fleet vehicles is very important because it will enable us to also look at route optimization as we go through the process. Crack sealing will be back again. This is a preemptive maintenance that we can do at a certain time to ensure that we can sustain the life of the road. So we're introducing that again. And then I think the fourth bullet, the planning for the expiration of the waste management contracts. We have contracts for both recycling, collection, disposal. These are coming up in 2020. Want to know what our plans are in place because you go out to tender 2 years before to look at it. You have to give, if there's a change in the ownership or the proponent, time to buy vehicles and get the necessary equipment. So that's coming up. Lean process, I'll talk a little bit more about this as we go through. We've been doing this. We've had success in the immediate comes to mind is down at the meter shop in the handling the equipment. We've also done it with the electricians and millwrights at the wastewater treatment plant. So we're continuing that as we move forward. And again, the key will be the citywide transportation master plan, which will be wrapped up in 2016 to move forward for the, what are the future plans for the city over the next 10, 20, 30 years. Solar landfill feasibility study and revenue assessment, that's underway, and we'll be coming back reporting to Public Works Committee and Council on that. And again, the red light camera program is something that we've been directed to continue with, and so we'll work with that moving forward for new locations. And I think we're getting close to the end of the pressures and challenges. Again, utilities performance in the right-of-way, especially with all the intensification. We really need to work on that. And then again, the backlog of infrastructure needs. We keep coming up with different technologies. We know it's a problem, but I think we have some very positive methodology that we're utilizing to address it. I will put up the winter control program. Again, the last update we had sent when we did our forecast year end, we were looking at between $4 to $5 million in a deficit. And again, with November and December not being on what we normally look at, we're looking at a $1.4 million deficit in the winter control program. It's important to realize we have a winter season program. Winter control is part of it, and then we have winter maintenance. Winter maintenance is the ongoing operations of maintaining the road. So right now, our winter maintenance is very active because we're not plowing, so the staff are out working on the roads, right through the litter pickup, for instance, to ensure that the maintenance is being done. The asset inventory, what you have here is it shows the increase over the year over year in all the different assets that we own and operate. You go down through it, you'll notice in cemeteries, we have 2 new cemeteries. What happens when a cemetery is abandoned by legislation, the city is required to take it over. So we've just added 2 cemeteries to our inventory. They're at Olmsted Native and Hat Cooley. And so with these, going in, we have to maintain them, cut the grass, ensure if there's any vandalism, we have to address it. But the key is, this shows the growth in the assets and services, and a lot of this is driven by development. And as you can see, the last item is, there's a 1% increase in households, so 1% increase in assessment. So by increasing the assets, it generates additional operating costs for us, more roads to plow, more pickups of garbage in that. And so what we do is in the budget, we have what's called incremental operating impacts from capital that we budget for. And again, that cost, there is an offset for it. We do get an increased assessment revenue. So that, that is both the service requirement for the new development, but we also have the offset revenue that comes in through the budget. But again, this doesn't get moved into our budget until the actual asset is starting to, we have to maintain it. So the operating budget, so here's the different cost categories that we have, and I'll go through in more detail next slide, but just, our total gross expenditures, we're in at a 2.4% increase. And the key drivers are, so our employee-related costs are 3.9. This is the collective bargaining agreement, benefit increases, government benefit increases, OMER increases, if there's been job evaluations, merit increases, they're all part of this. The winter season, it's going up 621,000. Again, we use a 10-year perpetual average for the winter maintenance, so it goes from the beginning on the previous chart to 2014. What's also in here is we know there's increased contractual costs, so they're built into this number. The waste disposal contracts, again, this is we have probably $50 million in waste management contracts, so this is the CPI increase that's built into each one of the contracts, along with, if there's additional houses, there's additional collection that drives it as well. So it's both cost as well as volume increase for the waste contract. The DARTS budget is forecast at $294,000 increase. The 10-year transit strategy, it's $3.5 million, but again, I have a revenue slide that will offset this, because we had the 15-cent fare increase that we will build in. So this is still at the gross numbers. The transit fleet reserve, it's in the fifth year of 8-year phase-in. What we did when we transferred the $3.7 million to buy buses out of the capital, we agreed that we would replenish that reserve. And so we're phasing that in over the number of years. Street lighting program, again, through the efficiency that we've implemented with the LED, we've been able, and through the negotiation on the rates, we've been able to address a $200,000 cost savings. The fuel reduction, we went down to 95 cents in fuel. That was a $500,000 reduction for the city. The ATS vehicle reserve, we have a healthy reserve for the purchase of the buses and vans. We don't need the contribution this year. And then I have a footnote in here. We haven't built this into the budget, but as we move forward, we feel there's, we do have a reserve to stabilize. We feel there's another $500,000 of savings in fuel, but that will come. Mike will bring that forward with other issues as we move forward. So the gross revenues are going up 2%. Again, fees in general. Again, this is where you would have the fare increases, the primary one there. So we have a decrease in the transfer station, community recycling reserve, and what we've utilized is the recycling commodity prices are also impacting this. So what we have here is the reserve. It can be utilized for this. It is a stabilization reserve for it, so it's something we can look at in the future as well. A WDO subsidy, it's increased. We're budgeting $4.1 million. Our actuals in 2015 were 4.4. So we increased the budget by $600,000. There may be room as we move forward in closing out the budget to maybe get more revenue there as well. And again, the traffic signal energy efficiency, we implemented the program, and this is a direct savings through the energy. So this is a savings that's going right to the bottom line for the program. And then the last one is the 15-cent fare increase gives us a $3.2 million revenue increase. So when you look at the expense increase, there's about a $300,000 net increase, and that's what we told council when you endorsed the 10-year transit strategy and the budget for 2015 and moving forward with the fare increases. So the net departmental budget overall, we're in at a net levy impact of 2.5%. Here it is by the individual divisions throughout Public Works. So again, 2.5 is the bottom line at this point, and there will be, again, if the fuel is reduced, this number will decrease as we move forward with approving the budget. Again, 2.5. And then the last slide is our continuous improvement. And these are areas we've been working on and that we will continue to implement. So you have call handling implementation. This was a service level service delivery strategy that we've implemented. The route rationalization. And there's a number of them that we will continue on through. I believe this was asked by in other budget meetings about the continuous improvement. It's important to know we do both Lean and we do Six Sigma. Lean, it looks at how to streamline processes, and eliminate non-value items. The Six Sigma, it's identify and rectifies errors and defects in the process. So, we call it Lean Six Sigma, but it's two different processes, and we're applying both of them as we go through our continuous review and improvement in the budget. And that's it for my presentation.
Okay, so we're going to just deal with the scope of Jerry's presentation. I have Councillor Jackson, then Councillor Ferguson.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. And Jerry, good starting off here. In fact, Jerry, maybe you just want to make a comment. The fact that I'm really encouraged by the fact you've come in at 2.5% overall. And I think the last few years, if memory serves me right, you've started anywhere from about the 4 to 6% range. So don't be too modest now. How have you been able to come in with a lower increase to start with, Mr. Deputy Mayor, through you?
So, through the chair, again, over the last, I'll say 3 years, we've had great increases to address waste management, winter maintenance, stormwater management. So all of the increases we've received over the past years, we're implementing those programs and ensuring that we're delivering them. So this is what I would call a maintenance budget, continuing. We have our hands full in ensuring all the services are being delivered. And so it really is, what we were given, put our heads down, get to work and deliver it. So there's no new increase in the operating costs at this point. Now there is in the budget incremental operating costs that are in the corporate services program that will be transferred to us to address some of the existing needs of the infrastructure. But this is really what I'll call a maintenance budget. Last year we received a significant amount of money plus FTE, and we're working at delivering all of that.
Perfect, Jerry. Good explanation overall. Quickly back, Jerry, just to slide 9, please. I'll just quickly chronologically go from the earlier slides to where you finished up. Thank you. So where Councillor Whitehead and I represent, and the Ward 7 future councillor, we are now considered, South District, Mr. Deputy Mayor, through to Jerry? Now that it's been split between East and South?
That's correct. You're South. Yes.
And I supported this. I believe we gave you 2 or 3 extra bodies, 2 extra bodies last year, Jerry, in the budget that was to provide, I believe, either weekend, overtime work, extra FTEs. Those 2 extra FTEs were supposed to, I think, carry the extra workload. And also this was part and parcel of a reorganization going on. So you currently then will have 4 superintendents in 4 districts, Mr. Deputy Mayor, through to Jerry.
So through the parks, we have 4 superintendents now. Greg Murdoch's. I'm looking for him.
Director Murdoch, please.
Yeah, through the chair, we didn't get any additional FTEs for District South. What we did is we converted an existing position to be the new superintendent. But the answer to the question is yes, we have 4 superintendents, 1 for each district.
Yes, Jerry. Thank you, Craig.
So through the chair, the 2 FTEs were in Betty Matthews Malone area,
That's
operational, to address the previous growth initiatives.
Okay, very good. I knew there were 2, so I was in the roads area with Director Matthews Malone. Slide 13 quickly, Jerry, please. And just want to make sure, I think your staff has done a much better proactive job with catch basin cleanups. I don't see it referenced here. I see the culverts and that, but Mr. Deputy Mayor, through to Jerry, just for a comment, please. I think, again, if memory serves me right, we gave you some additional dollars in the last budget year or 2, but it was primarily earmarked towards more regular proactive catch basin cleanup.
That's correct. Through the chair, that's correct. I believe we're on a 2-year cycle for catch basins. So catch basins get cleaned once every 2 years.
Okay, very good. And Jerry, quickly to slide 19. So, Jerry, you mentioned about incremental operating costs from impacts on new capital assets. So I take it that overall now you now build, so if a new subdivision goes in, Mr. Deputy Mayor, which a new park is built, and additional roads and kilometers to clean and to maintain, you now build into future operating budgets or you borrow from future capital. Help us explain a little more there, but at least I'm encouraged by the fact, whereas before you didn't budget for it or anticipate for it, and then years down the road, you had a pressure on the budget, but now I understand if you build that new splash pad, you open up that new subdivision, you're already building in future operational costs. Mr. Deputy Mayor, through you.
Through the chair, that's correct. So sitting in the corporate financials, corporate services section of the budget is an amount for incremental operating costs for public works. Again, so when that amount gets approved, we then in 2015 the amount was transferred when we opened the park, for instance, that money was transferred to us. So in 2016, there's also an amount there that will come into our 2017 base budget.
Very good. And lastly, Mr. Deputy Mayor, Jerry, in spite of the balmy, lovely weather, we're not jinxing ourselves, this 2016 winter operations. There is no thought on your part at all of pulling aside any or pulling away from what is currently budgeted for this winter's operation. Mr. Deputy Mayor, through to Jerry.
Through the chair, no, we're on winter alert, winter watch, winter operation. It's in effect until April 15th, I believe is the date. So mid-November to mid-April. That's all in effect. We have the 3 contracts. IMOS, which is they're available 24/7. We have our standby, which again is they have to be available 24/7. And then the third contract is the call out as a winter event materializes. If we need them, we call them. But the 2 main contracts are in effect, and the equipment and manpower is in place when we need it.
Excellent planning and preparation. Thanks, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Ferguson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jerry, with good start. Thank you. And just on the winter control, though, I see on slide 22 that you are actually showing a $621,000 enhancement for winter control. And you say that's because of the 10-year average that you use. Mm-hmm. So the winter control is actually, despite the balmy winter we're having, going up.
So through the chair, the 10-year average is, I believe it's 05 to 2014. So that's the perpetual average we utilize. You also have there is a unit price increases in the contracts, and we also have the SALT program is in there. So the 2015 year is not built into the budget. I believe I can tell you it's 205 to 2014. Yeah.
And your doesn't include the brutal winter 2015.
Yeah. So the forecast actual of, basically 25.9 million is not part of the perpetual average.
Okay. The second question I have, same slide, and I just want to drill down a little bit on transit. You say the 10-year transit strategy is a pressure of $3.5 million on slide 22, but on slide 24, you say increased transit revenues is $3.2 million. Is that what, does one offset the other?
Yes, so it's a 300 net impact to the budget. Okay. And that's the number we told council last year when you approved the 10-year strategy.
I recall there's going to be no impact for the first 2 years of the transit strategy due to fare box increases.
Right.
And you've already confirmed that, but right. You're taking it out of one pocket and put it in the other on these 2 different slides. Okay, thank you for that. But you do show an impact on slide 26 for transit overall of $1,111,000. So that's the traditional transit before the enhancements then. Is it on slide 26?
Through the chair, that's correct. Now that number has a number of things, but fuel would be in there, so we have to, again, the fuel increase would be in there for transit, which is a significant user. So that number, if we drop the fuel, that will come down. There's the maintenance, the parts, but then also in there is the collective bargaining for salaries and wages as well. So it's a, it's at 2%. Which is, their collective bargaining agreement was basically the same as CUPE.
Okay, I'm not complaining. I'm just trying to understand the flow of the numbers. Yep. And the last question is, on the fuel, you're saying that we can expect a further reduction in that, can we?
So with the preliminary estimates, yes, we think you can go down to another 4 cents, which is about, it's about 120,000, so 480, I said $500,000, yeah. But it's not in the budgets, so it's not in any budgets.
How would that impact the 2.5%?
0.5% is 1 million, so it would go down about 2.2, 2.3.
Okay. And this number of 2.5% excludes, maybe this is a better question for Mike, but excludes the assessment growth of between 1 and 1.5%. Is that correct?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, the assessment growth is applied to reduce the levy impact for all residents, so it's not distributed to any particular program or service.
So that 2.5 after assessment would be about 1 to 1.5% then. If it's a 1% or a 1.5% assessment growth, it would bring that down.
So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, 1% assessment growth relates to $9 million. But again, we apply assessment growth to reduce the levy. We don't distribute it to any particular program or service.
Okay, just so I'm crystal clear then, this is 2.5% excluding assessment growth.
For you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, yes, there's no assessment growth distributed to Public Works.
Okay, well, that's great, Jerry. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. One quick question, Jerry. Back on the budget, I think it was your budget pressures one that you had up previously, where there was a reference to the ATS reserve. Can you explain that one? Because when we look at other reserves, and you have another one up there, the Transit Fleet Reserve, where we've been phasing in increases. WSIB is another one in the organization historically where we've had to build up the reserve because they've been in a deficit position. Is this one in a position where it's so flush with resources that we're doing away with the contribution, or how do we achieve that much in savings from the reserve?
So through the chair, that's it. The reserve is in excess of $6 million, and Dave and company did an analysis for future needs out of it, and it's we won't need really to start putting anything back into it for over 10 years.
Okay. Thanks for that. That's the only question I have at this time.
Thank you. Councillor Connolly.
Sort of piggybacking on Councillor Jackson, you talk about the east-south district, and you said it affects Ward 9 and 11, and then when Councillor Jackson talked, it was about 6, 7, and 8. So I'm just need clarification. So
I'll let Craig Murdoch talk. I think it's across the mountain, which would include wards 9 and 11. But Craig, can you? Not.
Back here.
Through the chair, sorry for the delay. We were trying to figure out which road it was. It's Upper Mount Albion is the split.
more Upper Mount Albion, including Ward 11, or Upper Mount Albion to Centennial, or Upper Mount Albion to what?
So I think I know the answer. So it's Upper Mount Albion east is the south. Upper Mount Albion to the west is south. Upper Mount Albion east, including Ward 5 and 11 and 10 at the bottom, and 9 is east. I see nods, yes.
So the split is Ward 9 and Ward 11 for east, and then 7 and 8 for west?
That's correct.
For,
and then,
south?
yes, south.
And that will give us more opportunities to do more work, or what are we doing here?
No, through the chair, what it does, it gets us to deploy the resources to address the needs. Because of the growth in the area, that's why we split it. So you will have another superintendent in District East, and you also have one in District South. So when you call in, previously, councillors would call the one superintendent. We now have, you still will have a direct connect to a superintendent, but their portfolio is now manageable.
Has this started already, or this is going to start
So
in the near future?
For the parks, it's started. Through the chair, parks has started. After winter maintenance, we're delivering it for the roads program. You'll have a similar model.
And they take care of shaving page and all that kind of stuff, or
So-
what kind of service?
So through the chair, the parks takes care of everything.
I know a park. Oh,
Yeah,
Parks takes care of everything.
well, everything, including the parks. They do the cemeteries as well, and then you have, it's under Tennessee Propito's Parks and Cemetery.
Yeah.
But the roads, when it's split, yeah, they will do exactly that, the curb maintenance, pothole maintenance, anything that that is required.
Okay. And slide 13, you talk about hubs and terminal completions and that, and I'm just throwing this out, that we've talked about having a hub in Upper Stony Creek for 2 years now, and we've got several good bus lines up there, and they're doing a pretty good job, but they're not connected with each other. So if you can't get to Rymel to go down to Eastgate from anywhere except if you're on Rymel or Centennial, and the idea is to have a hub, so I could get off one bus and get another bus and make it more attractive to the people in Ward 9, because the bus service, even though it's good, it's not efficient because we don't have these connections. And I'm just wanted to put it out to you and to Transit, Mr. Dixon, and I know he knows because we've talked about it, that it is a priority, and I know it's not going to be this year because you've already mentioned, but please keep it on your radar for working on and try to get something done in the next year's budget.
But through the chair, when Dave presents, he'll look at, what the capital requirements are, both for terminals, transit shelters, transit priority and like that. So he'll have that as part of his presentation today, so you can get a better sense. You can do it twice.
I have Councillor Collins the second time.
Thanks. Mr. Chairman, back to you, Jerry. In terms of the reserve, I'm just sitting here thinking about that. So I want to be clear, because it is a substantial savings. It's not often, that we see that kind of a number in front of us from a savings perspective.
Right.
But to know that, just using your math there, we're looking at 15 million over 10 years. Can I get an understanding in terms of how we came to that conclusion that we would have been over contributing for a period of time? And I just pulled up the reserve here. It's not like it's the red camera reserve where we have tens of millions of dollars. So can I need to know or get a better understanding in terms of how we came to the rationalization internally that we're not going to contribute to the reserve for whether it's 5 or 10 years, whatever it is, and that we're able to take this amount of money out of the budget. Can I get a better understanding of that?
Okay, so through the chair, I'm going to ask Dave. Dave and George Brovac worked on it. So Dave, if you can answer the question. Thanks.
So through the chair, part of the presentation, hopefully you'll see later today on ATS, is discussion about a new business model, moving away from large buses, not entirely, but to a large extent. And this fund is for...
It's part of ATS.
So Councillor Collins has just informed me that it sounds like it's more pertinent to the next presentation you're going to make anyway, so he'll reserve his opportunity to further flesh that question out. So thank you, David. So I have a question, so I'm going to pass the deputy over to, who's the last deputy? Councillor Pearson. Just one question. Jerry, is it your division, Parks Division, that deals with walkways through parks? Snow removal.
Through the chair, yes, we do all the maintenance in the parks, grass cutting, snow removal where needed. Yes, it's public works.
And what is the standard, knowing that many of our youth and students utilize these pathways to access their schools? Because I know we have thresholds for roads. I'm trying to understand what our thresholds are for those particular sidewalks.
Through the chair, I'll ask Tennessee or Craig to answer that.
Through the chair, the threshold is 4 inches and within 24 hours after the snowfall.
So 4 inches, so is that the same application we have for residents and their clearing of sidewalk snow removal is 4 inches? So if it's less than 4 inches, they don't have to remove the snow on their sidewalk?
Through the chair, we do not have that threshold. It's as soon as it's snowing, we request that they clear their sidewalks.
Okay, so I think I just made my point. So we expect residents to hold a higher standard in regards to our sidewalks, in regards to snow removal, than we hold ourselves to in regards to these pathways that many families and children and youth utilize to access their schools and churches. So it's 4 inches before we go in there and clear those sidewalks or pathways, but homeowners are required to clear the snow off their sidewalks immediately after 24 hours, within 24 hours of the last snowfall. So see the challenge with the standard, and I would only hope that we would match those two standards up in our, because I make a lot of complaints about clearing of snow in parks. So, for example, St. Thomas More School, it's got 2 major walkways through. Just hundreds of kids are using it. It's always covered in snow, and I get complaints from the school, I get complaints from the parents, I get complaints from the students that it's never clear. Now, I wouldn't say never, but it's never done at the same standards as we're holding residents to keep the sidewalks to. So that's why I asked if there's a policy and a lever of standard, because I know there's cost implications, so don't get me wrong, but I need to understand, if we haven't developed a standard for those particular sidewalks, I think it would have to be at least consistent with what we expect of our residents clearing their own sidewalks, and that's all I asked for. So can we at least consider incorporating that policy and what the cost implications of doing such?
So through the chair, yes, we'll take it under, and we'll report back on what the impact would be.
Appreciate it. That's my only question. I'll take back the chair. Right, Mr. Davis, you're finished, so we'll move receipt of Jerry Davis's presentation. Moved by Councillor Farr, second by Councillor Green. All those in favor? Any opposed? Carried. At this point, I believe it's Mr. Dixon.
Good afternoon to everyone, and thank you. So last year I was in front of this committee, council, in terms of the 10-year strategy for local transit, and we went forward to the province for some funding of that strategy. That did not materialize, so today principally I'm here to talk to you about a way forward in terms of funding that strategy. So I'm going to start with some background, really just go through the kind of history that's transpired. I'm then just going to very briefly review the 10-year strategy, and then really get into the meat of what today is about, is finding a way forward in terms of funding the requirements of the 10-year strategy with recommendations. So just on background, I want to start just a little sales thing here, always to start, the value of transit and its importance to a city. And I think you can put it into a number of issues, but at the end of the day, I believe it comes down to these four central tenets. And the first is that it's really an enabler. It's an enabler to allow density. And the converse of that is equally important. By allowing density and intensification in certain areas, it also is a preserver of the rural environment. The second point is critically important to the economic growth in terms of business of the city. And, I was out at Maple Leaf, and they would like 24-hour service. And the reality is, in today's economic environment, getting people to and from work is a critically important factor to employers who want to locate in this city. The third thing is really all around health and the environment. And, whether you're walking, cycling, transit, it's healthier than driving a car from A to B. And certainly from a carbon footprint, there's no question that transit's going to help us. And the final one is really around social equity. And what transit really allows people to do is fully participate in society. So whether you're not fortunate enough to have a vehicle, whether you just can't drive a vehicle, whether you're too old. Transit really is an inclusive mode of transit. And I like this little quote I found along my travels, and it's by Enrique Peñalosa. And I would probably put in a healthy and prosperous city instead of a developed country is not one where the poor have cars, but rather where the rich use public transportation. So in that context, just going forward, why do we need to care about our local transit? And I think, predominantly this city is, I don't think I need to tell anybody around this table, it's in a growth mode. And both in terms of residential, just population, it's growing over 1 to 2%. And in terms of employment, a similar expectation. And some of this is directed by the province in terms of places to grow. And our transportation master plan, which is currently being updated, really speaks to shifting our mode of transportation. So it talks about pedestrians, it talks about transit, and it talks about the vehicle. And it really says, because of our road limitations, because of all the good things that the other modes will do, we have to look at avenues holistically. And it's not just about moving cars, it's about moving transit, it's moving pedestrians, it's moving cyclists. And so, particular to transit, it's talking about a 7 to 12% modal shift. And to do that, it really means we have to significantly change our rides per capita from 45 to somewhere in the 80 to 100 rides per capita if we are going to make that shift. Now, so far, as you can see, we haven't really gotten a long way towards that. So HSR is a very efficient and effective system. So Hamilton has a great system. We've had relatively low fares. We've had relatively low investment, not the lowest, but lowest percentage increase in investment at the city level. And if we are going to continue to keep Hamilton's transit great and meet the aspirational goals of the city, we need to invest in transit. And so we presented last year really a four-prong approach. The first was, let's fix what's wrong with the system. The second was to develop standards. The third was to keep up with growth once we fix the system. And the fourth was to try to lead growth through supply demand and really the evolution of the blast network and the addition of an LRT or higher order transit in the future. So council around this table supported it, and I would say unanimously supported it, with the exception of the funding. And so you supported a 2-year plan to fix deficiencies, which really involved a $6 million investment, a 50-person headcount, 25 buses procured. You supported fare increases in the terms of 2 15-cent increases in September of 15 and 16, followed by 2 10-cent increases, along with getting the seniors' fare more in line with comparator transits. You also supported the new service standards. And finally, this is the non-unanimous piece, you supported approaching the province to ask for funding of the $300 million roughly that we needed for capital in addition to the LRT. So we went forward and we made that pitch to the province for roughly the $300 million, which is really about $57–60 million of buses, $200 million in terms of a maintenance facility, roughly $39–40 million in terms of customer initiatives, and about $6 million in terms of signal priority, or I would go beyond signal priority, but priority measures. So we asked that, and of course, a great day for Hamilton. The announcement came in May, and principally that the B line would be built for roughly $1 billion and a GO station at Centennial for $200 million. Which really brings us to today. So we are still short that $300 million. So just quickly, in a little more detail, what was the 10-year local transit strategy? And it really started building upon the great system we have, continue to improve the customer experience, fix the deficiencies, put in standards, continue to grow the system until the system is at capacity, and then build higher order transit. So I think at the end, though, there was a recognition, and you'll see that today, that higher order governments have to get involved in the capital funding, and that's pretty consistent throughout North America. So the first one was really just around continuing to enhance the customer experience. It was really about amenities, shelters, and information, along with marketing, customer service, branding. We then went on to fix the deficiencies. The deficiencies were really a 2-year plan, $6 million injected in an annualized form, $2 million in September of 15, $2 million in March of 16, and another $2 million in September of 16. 50 full-time equivalents, 25 buses, and that was kind of the scope of that. We're well underway. We've got the first piece in September of 15. We're about to put the second piece in, and I believe, will be in a pretty good position by the end of this year in terms of catching up with demand. The third part was really to revise the standards. We did have standards, service standards, which objectively guide the implementation of service, but they were incomplete and somewhat outdated, so we went ahead and put together our service standards, and they're really based on 5 things. One is a coverage standard, that 90% of all residents and businesses are within a 400-meter walking distance of transit. A span criteria. A lot of transits let this grow organically to whatever the span requirement is. We've chosen 5 to 2 principally. A frequency, and we say a frequency of basically a half hour is as wide as we want to go, except for the evenings, we'll go up to an hour. A productivity standard, and this is kind of the base, the floor of your service, so you want at least 15 people getting on a bus per hour during non-peak times and 25 during peak times. And finally, a loading standard, which says basically 100% means everybody gets a seat during non-peak times, 25% stand during peak times. So that standard, again, was approved. We looked at how that standard would fit to what our current service is, and largely, other than frequency gaps, we think we are pretty much there. So it's primarily heavy on labor, 12 labor equivalent at this point. That'll get refined, and 1 bus. And then the final piece was really continue, once we got the system fixed, we got objective standards to put it in, was really to keep up with ridership growth, which is really the top piece of this slide. And it talks really to, expanding out to new subdivisions, adding service in terms of loading and frequency to existing, and connectivity within the current network. But this is all demand driven. On the lower part of the slide, it really talks about supply, kind of build it and they will come. And so this is really the piece that shifts your modal split. And so what we talk about is to continue to evolve the, what I call the BAT network now, the BAT lines, but also put in the S&L lines before demand would actually drive that to lead ridership, and worry about connectivity both within the city and interregional connectivity. So, really that lower piece is about developing the full blast network. We've got the B line and the LRT. We do have an A line bus-based, but it's really about building out the rest of the network. And to do that, is really the final 7 years, substantive money and number of vehicles. You could see here in the tens of millions order. The final thing I just wanted to add is, we would do normally signal priority, queue jump lanes, transit-only lanes, fare paid zones, proof of payment. We'll have to do proof of payment on our streetcar line just by virtue of the vehicle. Our light rail line, and large capacity buses. So that's kind of, in very quick order, the 10-year plan that we went through. And now is really the piece that we need to try to fund this. And just quickly, we're going to go through fares and then, funding what the whole strategy looks like. And I'm going to provide an alternative to that. So fares, just again, kind of going over recognition of the fair share principles that residents and customers equally value from transit, and therefore the premise is they should equally pay for the service. The structure of fare media is such that the adult ticket is what all other concession fares are predicated on, based on, and the recognition that we do need some fairly aggressive fares in the early going, followed later by fares at least keeping up with CPI to fund the organization. And so again, Council approved these two 15-cent increases followed by two 10-cent, and which led to us being able to really approve the service and operating plan for the 10-year. And so this was approved in principle the first 2 years, 15 and 16, but the kind of map forward in terms of the latter 8 years with a commitment to come back to council each year in terms of what we actually need to do. So the real issue became the capital piece. And what I wanted to do was just break down the capital a little further. So essentially, to fully fund this, we need $57 million additional in terms of a bus fleet, roughly 81 buses. We need $200 million or whatever an MSF or a garage costs. We need $15 million in terms of terminals, which terminals are roughly, we price them out at $3 million, so we're talking about 5 terminals, Councillor. We need to invest in shelters. We've put $10 million in there. Branding, which is really the application of identity to assets. So there's different ways to do that. We can brand all our assets through attrition, but it's really giving customers identity with our different types of service we offer. And finally, the priority measures. So that in total is $300 million. It's adjusted a little down because we do have the LRT line now. And I wanted to talk specifically about the MSF because the MSF, the garage, is the elephant in the room. It's in the order of $200 million. The Mountain Transit Center is at capacity. We have no indoor space. We have some outdoor space. We have to struggle through with it at this point. But this city, if they're going to evolve their transit, needs to have a new garage. And so from the greater whole, we've looked at this and works. And really, at the same time there's a transit need, there's a greater need in works also for better operational facilities. And because Wentworth was purpose-built as a garage and is well located, we see some value from a deadheading point of view of actually if it could be possible to retake that garage as a transit division and rebuild something for operations. So it's in the order of $100 million. There's some money available from water. We would look at probably having to make a $25 million investment in upgrading Wentworth to make it back into a garage. But all in all, when you do all those numbers, it's in the order of $40 million that the city would have to put in. We are proposing that $100 million be funded jointly by feds, province, and the city. And depending on where we go and what the interest is, and you're all better connected with the political situation than I, but I'm very hopeful with the Liberal government and what they're talking about infrastructure, that is an opportunity. The only thing I would say is this: once we start those discussions, this strategy may change or shift a little, in that there may be bigger interest in funding a garage than an operations center. So I think we need to be nimble to that. But what I'm really asking for this year is $5 million to, one, procure land, and two, to begin the design, because I do believe time will be of the essence should funding, either a federal program or provincial program, be announced. So if you accept that argument, and I realize the city has many needs, we have put together here in terms of capital, and really I don't think you need to read through all the, does this guy have a pointer? All the detail, but if you look at the bottom line, in terms of capital from and this is just a straight levy transfer across all, so there's no area rating or anything in that. You know, you're looking at 0.7 or 0.8% in that order in terms of what you would have to put in of levy every year. And when you combine that back with the operating, for 17 to 19, you're over 1%. It does fall off to about 0.5% in the outer years. So pretty substantive ask. And I recognize I'd be very happy if you all said, great, Director Dixon, we're happy with that and we want to fund you, and stop right there. But in anticipation that might be a little bit too big of ask, we've looked at some alternatives. And so, you know, the first column you sort of see under the orange column is the all-in and the kind of capital costs with that. The next column is what will we do just to keep up with growth? And the third set of numbers is really what will we do to keep up with growth and not do any branding or large shelters. We'd still do small traditional shelters. And what would that look like? And so one of my concerns is until we have a new garage, we really can't move forward on really moving modal shift. We can muddle through with about 60 additional buses, but to get that other 60 in would just be insurmountable at our current location. So what I have really proposed here is splitting this into a bit of almost a 2 5-year strategy plan. And in the first 5 years, we're going to keep up with growth. So I'm asking you to fund 21 buses and help me start building a new garage in one fashion or another. And to do that, what we're looking at is much smaller numbers. First of all, the service and operating would change again. And then the capital would be only around 0.3 or 0.1%, in around that. Still a large number, I realize, but much more palatable, I think. And if you put the two together, you know, you're talking about from 17 to 19, or sorry, 16 to 19, somewhere in the 0.2, 0.3%. That includes operating commitment as well as capital commitment, followed by 0.1 in the outer years. But I caution you about 0.1 in the outer years. I'm certainly going to try to be back in front of you once I get that garage going to say, now we have the opportunity to make that modal shift. So it's kind of a 2-part, 5 years and 5 years. The first 5 years, give me enough buses to keep up with growth, get a maintenance storage facility or a garage built, or at least well underway, and then in the outer 5 years, deal with modal split. So that is really, at the end, what I'm going to be recommending to you. is that you re-endorse the 10-year strategy in principle, noting that, there will be some delay to implementing the modal split or the blast network. I'm going to ask you to fund the 21 buses, to provide me $5 million to get land purchased and engineering underway so that we have a shovel-ready project, and finally to pursue higher level of governments, probably not myself, but through whomever the appropriate parties in this organization are, and then to report back to Council next year on how we're progressing against the MSF. Because at the end of the day, I can probably keep up at the Mountain Transit Center. Not great. We already are parking buses outdoor, but we can jam enough buses in for the next 7 or 8 years to survive. But sooner or later, Hamilton needs another bus garage, and it'll hit you in 7 or 8 years for growth. And if you want to get progressive at transit, you're going to need it much sooner. So these things take probably 5 years to build once you have funding. It takes a couple of years to engineer them, and it takes a couple of years to build them. So that's what I'm recommending to you today on the 10-year transit strategy.
Thank you, Dave. I think this is a good pause for questions. I have Councillor Collins, Councillor Green, Councillor Jackson, Councillor Conley at this point. So Councillor Collins.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and a lot of information to digest. Through you to Dave. Dave, the 2015 enhancements that we approved, just to be clear, the status of the new hires, the new buses, the anticipated revenues that we had expected that would come with the increased fares, how have we done with each of those issues? Are we on target with some or all of the investments that we made for 2015? Through you, Mr. Chairman.
So we haven't actually bought any buses because there's long lead time, but we have deferred retirement. And we only have funding of that 25 buses to buy 11 because the other 14 was it the other way around? 14 and the other 11 was with Metrolinx. So that's where the buses are at. The workforce, we have hired roughly a third of that workforce, and we have put the service in. It's early going. We have October and November, and we're just finalizing December numbers. Ridership is slightly up. Revenue is about even, a little bit better, but not great. So as I said back last year, we anticipated with every hour of revenue service, we would get a 50% bump in ridership. We think that we're seeing that. But we also said that our elasticity on our fares would be in the 20% range, and we think that's probably been a little higher. So all in all, from a whole perspective, and I performance measure these things monthly, so I'm quite willing to share, and we watch it on a rolling 2-year average. All in all, I'd say we're close, but we're not dead on.
Good to hear. In terms of the new service hours that were implemented, when do we get a snapshot of where the investments have been made within the system? So last year there was a lot of questions in terms of where were you going to add buses, on what routes, at what times of the day. For those of us in the lower city, we certainly have struggled with the buses that pass people at stops along our busiest routes, and so a lot of anticipation in terms of when we might see changes in terms of an improvement. And I wonder whether staff are in a position at some point in time in the near future to give us some kind of information that would suggest we've made these investments in these areas of the system.
Through the chair, absolutely, we can do that. In the fall, we primarily focused on the King corridor. In March, we're going to primarily focus on Barton. And we did do some work up in Councillor Connolly's area in the fall also with the completion of Mud. But we can share that in great detail with you.
That'd be great if we could. Next question I have, Mr. Chairman, is the whole issue related then to the 2016 calendar year. And so the elephant in the room after last year's announcement in terms of the the LRT and the GO station funding was what happens to our $302 million request to the province related to many of the issues that you have here. Is it, can I get a high-level understanding then, Dave, because I had trouble understanding the difference between maybe two of the slides that you've presented. New information to us. I don't believe any of this is in the capital budget book. Is that a safe assumption to make through you, Mr. Chairman? This is all new information that we wouldn't have seen in this year's 2016 capital budget book?
Yes, that's correct, through the chair.
So the monies that you reference in terms of asking for the $5 million, we've just passed the capital budget. That would be financed how?
So that money would be financed through debt. So this is a combination of, and the capital that I'm recommending is a combination, just making sure I'm on the right slide, a combination of debt and levy increase to fund. But the MSF or the garage would be funded through debt, as would the initial buses that we need.
So if I look at if you want to call it the Plan B, because you've had to switch gears because we really don't know what's to come from either the feds or the province as it relates to any kind of a cost-sharing program. What's that total envelope now? It used to be $302 million, and now it's what? So
now it is right here. It's 14.1, 40, and 6.4. So roughly 60 million.
And that is split in what?
Well, yeah. So the key there, the real key there is the 40 million. Is assuming equal funding from provinces and feds. So we're trying to cost share the MSF. And the other big thing about that 40 million, it could go higher depending on what you do. But this is predicated on building a new operations center for roughly 100 million, putting about 25 million back into Wentworth to put hoists in. You need a CNG fueling plant. You might need above ground storage tanks for diesel, depending on where you go. I don't know the state air paint booth. So for getting that facility back up and operating it as a garage. But if we switch gears and go for a whole new garage, which might be the right thing to do, depending on what the interests of upper level governments are, that number could change. And so we really need to go down that road a little to see. And I think you got to go down that road a little to see where the interests of upper levels are before you start buying land and doing designs.
And the $5 million that you're asking, the upfront, comes from our share of the 1/3 40.
Correct.
And the total envelope then, I mean, debt financed is levy financed, right? So they're both one and the same. So you're suggesting that the whole envelope come from the levy? Or is there is there revenues from from fare increases that offset that?
So through the chair, no. I mean, if you look at even on the operating side, so when you go to this, it would just keeping up with growth. Roughly we were doing a 50% increase by any measure you want to talk about, people, vehicles, hours of service. This is about 25%. It's roughly half of that 126 buses. We're now looking only at 66. And it still is going to cost you money on the operating side. So, it's because you have a cost recovery ratio of about 45%. So it's going to be nothing coming from the fare box, even though we are increasing the fare box. That's really just keeping the operating side in balance. The capital side would be a combination. It's all coming ultimately from the levy, as you say, but it would be a combination of debt financing over a longer term versus, immediately paying.
And we've been through we're into the operating budget, and that's why you're here today. And we've already been through the corporate financials in terms of looking at future debt requirements. Can I ask, maybe it's a better question for finance in terms of how this then is incorporated into the short, medium, and long-term numbers that we've already received?
So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, the requests that are before you today for your consideration haven't been factored into our debt forecast to date. So we would have to revise our debt forecast and bring that information before committee. As well, in terms of the financing strategy, we would have to sit down with Transit to better understand the portion of the capital projects that are related to growth. There may be an ability to fund a portion of the project costs through development charges. If that's a possibility, we would have to look to open up our Development Charge Act for review again and amend the our Development Charge Bylaw for review again. So again, in terms of the debt, we would have to revise our debt and bring that information back to committee, as well as we'd have to sit down with transit staff to understand the split between growth and existing.
Dave, you're here today to give us an update. Is it your expectation then that, and I don't know how it's dealt with at SMT or otherwise, but is the expectation we receive the information today and send it back for that detailed information?
Through the chair, that's my expectation today, is just to provide you with an update on the plan, hopefully get some indication of where we might want to go, and then absolutely go back and make sure we fully understand every number. We have been working through some of the numbers through finance at a high level, but not in any level of detail, and so we do have some of it development charge funded there based on our best knowledge at this point.
Okay. And a couple more questions real quick. I know others have questions they want to ask. Through you, Mr. Chairman, what happens if the 80 million doesn't come from the province and the feds? What's the plan C then, so to speak? You've already revised the original plan to reflect the fact that we didn't receive funding. The municipality, ours and others, are going to have a list as long as our arm in terms of housing, infrastructure for roads and bridges. You've been through the budget meetings, so you know the corporate list is fairly large in terms of what we're going to ask the new Liberal government in Ottawa. If in fact we don't see some or all of those funds, what happens to the plan? What's plan C then?
So through the chair, plan C is really you would have to operate out of the Mountain Transit Terminal. Could we fit 60 buses in there? I think there's probably a way, obviously not ideal. It'd become very inefficient. They'd be stored outdoors, but there'd be no other choice. And so plan C would be to muddle through as long as you could with your current facility and figure out some way really to buy the 21 buses. So, from a, can I survive the next few years if you gave me 14 buses? I could. But you are definitely going to hit a wall in the next five or so years. And so you just won't be able to enhance transit. And these are long lead time things. I mean, a garage takes 5 years.
Right. Last question is the area rating. So there's a lot of new service hours. You're putting a lot of new buses on the roads. You mentioned Councillor Connolly's and Pearson, and traditionally we've seen most of the service enhancements in the old Hamilton community. When do we get a snapshot in terms of what the area rating impacts look like when you talk about having high-level discussions with finance? Is that something that we're going to receive at the end of this budget process? Is it something we can ask you now in terms of where do we see some of the changes within the current funding formula that we've established over the years? Through you, Mr.
Through the chair. So we can pretty much tell you what 15 and 16 looks like in terms of where we've added service or where we are going to, because we've got September done, we've got March pretty much in the bag, and all we've got is September left. We pretty much know, what application of service standards look like. Beyond that, it's going to be really applying the service standards. And so one of the things I'm very aggressively pursuing this year is automated passenger counters so that we can get good loading data. that's one of the things we struggle with as an agency, as a division, is we don't have good loading data. We don't have good origin destination data. And so we rely on, really selective hand counts. Once we have APC equipped buses, we will be able to very quickly determine that. And we would bring back to council each year what our recommendations in terms of ads are to fulfill the service standards.
Okay. If you could come back to me then, Mr. Chairman, at the appropriate time, I would move to, after all the questions have been asked, to refer this to finance staff for transit to meet with them and come back with a finance strategy, both operating and capital, that would seek to update not just what we've received in the past, but how it's incorporated into the global capital and operating budgets.
Fair enough, and I know Mike's paying a lot of attention. Michael, do you have a comment?
Just through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, just to the question of the area rating impacts. I know staff are meeting, I believe, tomorrow. When we come forward at the end of this budget process with our tax policies report, one of the components to that report is the distribution of the changes in transit as it relates to lane kilometers of service, and that would then be captured, I believe, in our March or April tax policy report.
That would include what Dave is presenting here for 2016, or it would only include the 2015 numbers?
So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, our past practice has been to capture the forecast kilometer changes for the current fiscal year. So if transit have a forecast as it relates to the change in the kilometers of service for 2016 by former municipality, we would look to capture that in our March or April report.
Okay, thank you.
Of Councillor Matthew Green.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Mayor, and through you to Director Dixon. We're certainly in a much better place this year, at least I know I am personally this year, in dealing with this particular file. I just wanted to make the statement that I really appreciate the detail that's been put into this, the opportunity for us to receive it and have this conversation. My questions are along the lines of, it appears the thrust of this program hinges really on the garage. Is that fair to say, Mr. Deputy Mayor? It seems like the program is based on the garage.
Through the chair, the garage is your major impediment to expanding fleet. And if you can't expand fleet, you can't expand service. And so that's first. And second, it is the elephant in the room. It's a very costly endeavor. So, you're talking anywhere from 100 to 200 million. So.
And I remember those being the numbers. I think we had the sticker shock last year at this time on the cost of that, what we were calling the bus barn. We had, there's been conversations around LRT, the potential for Metrolinx perhaps picking up our Wentworth station. It's already in preliminary plans. I'm wondering if we were to be in that position, could the proceeds of the sale of that land to Metrolinx not fund this $5 million or $6 million upfront?
Through the chair, so a couple of complications is really, if the LRT, MSF or OMSF as they call them, goes down to Wentworth, it really depends on where they place that. If they take over Wentworth, they need to replace the operations center. So operations needs to go somewhere. And so whether they're displaced by the city in terms of a bus barn or Metrolinx in terms of a streetcar barn doesn't really matter.
It feels to me, and I don't know, and I'm going to go ahead and state my ignorance and my newness to this topic, but it seems to me that a bus garage, highly technical, very specific, as you've outlined with the $200 million budget potentially, that the Wentworth yard was originally designed, and I know we had this conversation last year, so I don't want to beg the question, but it was originally designed, as I understand it, as a transit station. Was it looked at as an option in terms of the marginal cost for adaptive reuse of Wentworth should we find another location potentially for the LRT if that were to come up? I'm trying to find out what are all the options, were they fleshed out, how do we look at the good, better, best scenarios and find the best value for not just the taxpayers, but also to be able to support the plan as put forward today. I'm a big fan of the plan. I appreciate the work that's been done on this, but I'm just wondering, when you look at the variables, it seems like the infrastructure on the garage is the biggest one. So I'm just wondering if you can comment on what your staff recommendations were, or what some of the costs would have been to potentially adaptively reuse the Wentworth Station to its original use, because it feels like to me an public works operations building would cost a lot less somewhere else.
Through the chair. So first, there are a lot of things in motion. I think the first thing is, where is the LRT operations and maintenance facility going to land? There's really, in discussions right now around that, there's two issues. One is, we're very cognizant of the $1 billion. So if they do displace somebody, they need to make that whole. And, we'd rather spend that money, I think, on the line itself. And so we want to make sure we don't run out of money in that respect. The second thing, from an OMSF perspective, it is about a little over a kilometer from the main line. That's bordering on a long way. If you have no other choice, that's strict deadhead costs, so it adds to your operational costs. So there's that in play. There's the operations, the public works center, and their needs, including water. And then there's our needs in terms of transit. So all those needs have to be sorted through to determine who's going to go where. The movement of the operations yard at a very high level is about $100 million. The lowest I can see retrofitting Wentworth would be about $25 million. I could go a little higher, but so that's kind of order of magnitude dollars. And it's really, the first objective, because you have very limited opportunity. You need to be in proximity of the LRT line, is to get the LRT maintenance facility nailed down.
I would agree, although what I'm not clear about is that if we could fit 60 buses potentially into our existing one up on the mountain, could we not propose, or at least bring into the realm of conversation, an idea of a hybrid LRT bus barn scenario, given the space that's there, provided they took their section, made it whole for operations to go somewhere else, and then look at what potential cost savings might be in that regard?
Through the chair, so bus barns operate very different than LRT barns, unless there's some similarities. But on a bus operation, you basically have, on both operations you have the same things. You have servicing, nightly servicing, you have storage, and you have repairs. But on a bus line, it's basically fuel, clean. On the service line, store and bays, a lot better mobility. And then repairs, you put them on hoists. If you have a lot of money, you have drive-through hoists. That's kind of the luxury in that business. On a rail facility, very different. You have to have, now these are double-ended cars, so you have reversibility, but generally you like to have double ending. You're going to have on servicing, you're going to sand those cars nightly, you're going to clean them. So entirely different service line. You probably can't run the two through the same thing. For repairs, you're a combination of pits and hoists. And for storage, you're obviously probably going to be outdoor. Ottawa's doing indoor, Edmonton does indoor, but most of Ontario would do outdoor. So very different, configurations, and generally you wouldn't mix them. Calgary actually mixes them, it's just a very difficult situation to run. But what you could do, I think, is on Wentworth, there may be enough property to jointly do a rail and bus facility without knocking down any of the current facility.
And that, for me, is very helpful because I know in my preliminary newness to this process, certainly haven't been involved in the capital builds that you have, through Mr. Deputy Mayor. They're common sense questions that I know the community will be asking. I know there's already lots of speculation around what's going to happen on Barton Street with the line, and I don't like to deal in hypotheticals on old plans. I like to deal with current information. And given where we are now, it seems to be far beyond where we were last year, year to date. But what's apparent for me, and just as an acknowledgement of fact, our capital highlights for our budget this year, $91.8 million on roads, basically $18.2 million on transit. So I support moving in the direction of increased supports for transit to get ahead of what you were rightly identifying as being a potential shortfall 8 years from now. But then I look at things, we're talking about the red light funding and just different envelopes that we might be able to look at in terms of finding appropriate funds that help mitigate the cost. Because I can tell you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, we put the burden on the ratepayer last time, and I would like to see us be more responsible in terms of how we're funding it moving forward in a more comprehensive kind of citywide way. So I appreciate the options that you've brought forward, but what's still left for me, Mr. Deputy Mayor, through you, is looking at all the possibilities, understanding that your recommendations are coming from your expertise. I acknowledge that, but just making sure those numbers are available to the public, that we open up that information, that everybody sees all the data, all the requests, so that when they come back, when a decision is made, we have full rationale why we went new versus old, why we went individual versus hybrid, just to be able to provide that context for both the media and the people who are watching today and perhaps at home. So those are the things that are present for me. The last piece, it came up in terms of making qualified decisions on transit. You made a very good point this year that I think I tried to bring last year with regards to your counters and the technology of having accurate data on who's using the bus, so that when we get in discussions about peak time and peak ridership at hours, it's not head counts, that we have quantified data, point in time as well as location, where they're getting on, where they're getting off, so that as a council we can make informed, evidence-based decisions rather than what can at times become emotional-based decisions. So those are my keys there. I appreciate the opportunity to be able to take this back now, work with the community, work through your report, which is very comprehensive. All I ask through the Deputy Mayor is that we also make available the good, better, best scenarios with the hybrid options, so as not to take them off the table, so that the taxpayer will know we're providing best use of tax dollar and best use of existing city-owned properties. So those are my comments and questions. I look forward to hearing the rest around the table. Thank you.
Okay, I want to suggest, because it's going to be a long presentation, that if we can keep it to questions as much as practical. And I know I'm one of the worst offenders, but I just want to put it out there. Councillor Farr.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Thanks for the presentation. I was very relieved during some of your answers there, Mr. Dixon, that you said we're still, quote, sorting needs, end quote. So I will be brief with just a few questions. Some have already been answered, but I'm a little confused and I want to get an understanding. I think the first question would be through you to perhaps Mike. Mike, are we not having a council infrastructure funding priority meeting? Are we not meeting soon, or what is the date when we're getting together to assemble a list of priorities with respect to asks we may have of the feds?
Actually, if I can, through the Deputy Mayor, that was direction that you gave us to hold a special meeting of GIC to discuss government priorities. So I don't know if we settled on a date yet, but you're absolutely right, Councillor. That's where we'd be discussing transit amongst other needs such as U.S. Steel, housing, infrastructure.
Great. Through you, Stephanie, I'm seeing you shake your head. You don't have a date just yet to our clerk?
No, I don't have a date yet. Through you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, and obviously this will be a big part of that conversation, and I'll look forward to hearing when it is that we'll be sitting and putting our priority list together. So on the slide 66, the 5 million, I'm just trying to break it down. What's the split there? How much are you allocating toward what you're asking for, the two things you're asking for, land acquisition versus the design work? What does design work take up on that 5, and what is the land acquisition?
So through the chair, there is no definitive split, but I would say it's roughly 3 to 4 to buy land and 1 to 2 to design.
Okay, and then finally then, through you, Chair, what if we don't need to buy land? I heard you also answer, I think it was Councillor Green, in saying that Wentworth may be enough to do both rail and bus, and if that's the case, why do you need the 5 million or that portion of the 5 million?
So through the chair, if that scenario works out, we will have to displace the operations who is currently in Wentworth, and they will need to procure land.
Why wouldn't you just trade off with Mount Hope? What happens to Mount Hope? Through you.
So through the chair, Mount Hope still functions as an operating facility. You need that capacity as well as the lower city capacity.
Well, I'm hearing the max out 200 million bus barn, or MSF, you call it, right? MSF? Is it MSF?
Well, through the chair, some call them maintenance storage facilities,
Okay.
some call them operating maintenance.
I like MSF versus bus barn. I had a problem, Mr. Chair, with bus barn last year. So the 200 million MSF, that's in addition to maintaining what we have in Mount Hope.
Through the chair, yes, that is correct.
Okay, well, that's where I was a little, thank you. That's good for now. I think I'll be supporting the referral motion. I was just expecting as much anyway from Councillor Collins, and very much really appreciate you, as Councillor Green indicated, done a great deal, obviously, since our last debate, and you clearly know your stuff, so I appreciate it.
Thank you. I have Councillor Connell.
Thank you. I just got one question. It's about the fare rates. Now, last year we were going to do a 25-cent fare rate, but it was turned down, and we did a 15-cent. We did a 15-cent fare rate. Is that right? Is that what I recall?
Through the chair, that the original proposal was for 25 cents followed by 3 10-cent increases, and that was, I believe, amended by Councillor Collins during the debate.
Don't matter who. Yeah, somebody amended it. What kind of rate do you want to see that's workable percentage-wise from fare rates to tax levy? In other words, you said we're at 45% monies that we get from fare rates. Was I right hearing that?
Through the chair, that's correct. Our revenue cost ratio is around 45, maybe a little.
Do you want him to? What would you like him to be? What's the average in the province or whatever? Is 45 the average, or are we low, or what?
So through the chair, it really depends on who you talk to. So let me. So they're all over the map. They range from probably 10% to 80% is probably the best I know. And it really depends on what kind of operation you're running in terms of, are you just running a bus operation? Rail tends to be a lot more capital intensive, and it also depends on, American states are heavily funded at the federal level. So it depends where you are. The most American properties are around 20%. I would like to be at 50%.
That's what I wanted to hear. And we don't have a policy on that, do we? That the fare should be, or our aim is 50%. I don't know.
Michael, do you have an answer?
Through you to whoever, Mike, maybe?
So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, policy was brought forward to the previous council. It was just received, and what was approved in principle was the fares that were presented to this council last year as part of the 10-year strategy. So no policy, but again, what is before you is a 4-year strategy as part of the 10-year strategy.
Because I think it's just going to get worse over time with the amount of money we have to put in, the amount of money we receive. And I would really like to see a strategy that says it's 45%, if that's what it is, or it's 48%, or 50, or 60. But I think it's something we have to aim for rather than just guess at something, because that's the flavor of the month. So I don't know if it's going to go over in council, but I would really like to see a structured airfare, yeah, right, a structured fare that we're not guessing on every year and every 2 years, every 3.
So,
go ahead.
So through the chair, if I could just comment on that. I mean, so I think 50% is about the right place for Hamilton. But I think you need to be careful about how you get there. And there's a real balance between the service you provide and the fare you charge. We are at the low end, but we are aggressively applying fares. And you know, it was a bold move forward last year to aggressively go at fares as hard as we did. So there's a goal of 50%, but you got to be careful that you don't raise fares just overnight aggressively, because you'll drive ridership away and you will be in a worse position. So.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, myself, and then Councillor Ferguson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Dave, for a great report. And, you know, kind of nice to get an overview of what we've already committed to in terms of improvements in the transit system. I think it's been significant. In fact, we've made significant progress over the next, or will make significant progress over the next couple of years, which I think is fantastic. And, of course, we want to get to the bigger play, I think all of us, but the question is how and when. And so just to follow on the 50-50 fare split, I mean, I proposed that once upon a time to get away from the annual debate about how do we apportion, you know, the fare rate and how do we set the rate. You know, you would use the kind of the 50-50 split, saying that's the model, that's where we go forward on, that's what you use to set the rate, and it doesn't continuously come back to council to decide on whether it's 5 cents or 10 cents or 15 cents. So I think it's a great way to end that annual debate and just set a standard as to what comes from the levy and what comes from the fare box. But that's an issue for another day. The more important one is, you know, it seems to me that based on kind of the process that we're in now in terms of LRT, which leaves a lot of issues up in the air at the moment, and I don't think it's going to be resolved in the next 6 months. I don't imagine. So specifically, the public works facility and the vehicle facility, you know, is I mean, until GO and LRT and our staff actually come together and figure out where they're going to land on that issue, it kind of leaves a lot of things up in the air, doesn't it?
Through the chair, the LRT MSF will be decided in the next month, maybe 2 at most, because we absolutely have to have that to move forward on design of the line and in particular putting together the project-specific output specification.
Right. Okay.
So that'll sort itself. Once that sorts, then it's really about do we look for a new place for the operations group, water operations, and use the garage, the current garage, for transit, or do we look to build a new transit garage?
But either way, it's a funding envelope that we're going to need to go to the feds in the province with.
Through the chair, absolutely, and I mean that's one of the things. It's a bit of a chicken and an egg. We need a bit of money to kind of start defining these things, other than, you know, Dave Dixon with his knowledge of the business trying to estimate these things at a high level.
Right.
We need to get down to solid numbers to carry forward.
Okay, so I sense that we're going to do that through our staff, but I also kind of believe that we're going to then be putting this in the context of the broader infrastructure asks that's going to be made, you know, hopefully in the next 3 to 4 months. I mean, we'll be compiling lists, and I'm sure others will be bringing forward their ideas in terms of what kind of infrastructure we should be prioritizing on, and then that becomes part of the discussion. So I sense that we may not ready to adopt the plan today, but ready to actually go to the feds and the province to say, here's the information we have, here's what we believe, how it impacts our local tax base, here's what we believe we need from you, and then put that into the mix of the infrastructure ask that we're going to be advocating for on the federal and provincial side. And just to put my oar in the water in terms of what's probably more fundable, I can't remember the feds of the province funding a public works yard in any municipality, quite frankly, but transit is certainly on their radar. So I think it's something that we can certainly put in the mix of transit or mix of infrastructure priorities, and then go from there to see if we can make that fit in terms of future plans. Making all of that work, I think, is going to be critically important for us, one way or the other. When we do it and how we do it is going to be the challenge. So I'm really up for putting this into the infrastructure mix and adding that as a priority item to bring to the feds in the province. So great information, and you know what, the plan I think is sound. I think we need to get there somehow. And looking at all the resources we have, including Wentworth Street, I think is important. It certainly was originally designed as a trolley transit vehicle storage facility, not necessarily a freestanding bus facility. So that certainly portends some differences in terms of how it operates, but there certainly would be opportunities there as well. So I look forward to the additional information that Councillor Collins has asked for, that our staff will bring, and then we can put that into the context of the infrastructure ask. Thank you.
Ask Councillor Pearson to take the chair. Through the chair, I guess my first question is, you said you made some enhancements, but I didn't hear anything in respect to one of the biggest challenges, and that is many people, especially in the peak hours, in the freezing cold, being left at bus stops and being passed by because the bus is overfilled. I know that's an experience in the lower city, but certainly it's becoming more and more a predominant issue on Upper James. It's becoming a very prominent issue for students trying to attend Mohawk College and even getting to class on time. And it's probably a litany of complaints in regards to the ability for them just to get across the mountain to a college course, or from the lower city to a college course. What investments have we made to address the lack of capacity at peak hours and the what I call significant pass-bys for people waiting at transit stops along Upper James and on the Mohawk corridor?
So through the chair, we've so the investment in broad terms is 25 buses should this council fund the additional 11 buses that are needed to correct those deficiencies. So the investment is identified as 25 buses, 50 full-time equivalent persons, and roughly spread over 2 years. So, you've got 1/3 of it put in. We started in our, really because we don't have great counts, we started in our highest capacity corridor, which is the King Corridor. And we've based it on counts we went out and did by hand as well as pass-bys. And so our hope is by the fall of 16, this fall, coincident with the second 15-cent fare increase, that we will have addressed all overloading conditions in the city.
And I appreciate, as the head of HSR, you would come in and start off with, we got good transit. I beg to differ, and I think many people that I represent, and even in Ward 7 and beyond, would disagree in respect to the mountain and the level of services that is there. You identified one of the issues in respect to frequency. And the one thing I didn't hear in your presentation is convenience. I mean, if it's convenient, people, I think you used to quote, wealthy will take the bus. If it's not convenient, the most expensive way is take a vehicle, a car. Obviously, one of the alternatives is transit, but it has to be convenient. So when we look at distances, very short distance, a 12-minute ride by car, taking an hour to make connections for a bus, from one location on the mountain, Stone Church and Garth, for example, to McMaster University because of the number of changes you have to make. Although I've heard you've improved on it a bit, but it's still 45 minutes from an hour, so we reduced it by 15 minutes. You're still looking at a significant amount of time being spent on that transit bus for that student that may be attending McMaster University. So I'm trying to understand what have we done. I think Mohawk College provided a student. I thought he did an incredible job. I don't know the science behind it, but showing rerouting in respect to the mountain. So my question is, what have we done to address where these are clear deficiencies and actually more of a deterrent for people taking transit as opposed to encouraging them to take public transit?
So through the chair, so I would not agree we have a great transit system, first and foremost. So half-hour headways are not a great system. So in particular, we've done two things. One, we are putting 25 buses, which is on a 200 bus fleet. That's a 12.5% increase in service. So there's substantive service improvements. We're basing it on our loadings. The second thing we are doing is through this whole LRT initiation, and again, we have to get this in place relatively quickly so that we can model the impacts, is re-looking at the entire network in terms of its connectivity and making the LRT the backbone of the system. And I guess the third thing I would say we are doing to try to improve transit, because when you have wide headways, execution of schedule is critically important. And so at the MTC, we have set up a control room where we monitor routes by AVL, and we have a performance measure against that. No more than 2 minutes early, no more than 5 minutes late, and we take corrective action to try to get those buses on time. And we monitor the connections, the transfer points. So we're not there, we've just got that all happening. We've seen a marginal improvement on our on-time performance, and we are going to be very diligently monitoring that to make sure we, once we have the service in place to the level the city can afford and to the level that ridership demands, that we deliver the service we promise.
Appreciate it. I'm trying to understand proportionality. So when we talk about linear kilometers of roadway, arterial roadway, which is primarily the public transit systems, secondary roadways like Upper Horning, where it's a transit route. The largest growth in regards to the population is southbound in the city on top. And yet you're pushing to spend $200 million on something that, it's getting growth and hopefully get more through the LRT. But the LRT is going to take and carry some of that load. And yet you want to build another, I guess you're calling it a bus barn or a garage in the lower city, yet the numbers of buses and drivers and service, especially with the LRT being in place, wouldn't be at the same level. So help me understand the need to put it there, as opposed to whether we explored the expansion of the current site. There's lots of lands there. I don't know if we've looked at purchasing additional lands if needed. You can leave, and you already indicated many places do leave their buses outside. So the real question is, how many more bays do you need to install within that facility to meet the demand? Have we done that assessment?
Through the chair, we have. So there is land. So one correction. Most places, well, I should say most. So most places in North America store, let me back up again. Most places in Canada and the northern states store buses indoor, and it's really to do with the whole passenger compartment being warm as well as starting the engines. Whereas a rail vehicle, because it's always on the wire, has heat always produced. So you can actually clean them outside because they're heated, and you don't need to service them other than the sanding. So although more and more properties are moving to a service line. That's the first point. The second point is at the MTC, although there's a lot of land around it, it's largely floodplain. So we have looked at that, and there's very limited, other than the surfaced areas you see today. There's a small unsurfaced area at the back that we use really for dead bus storage and new buses as we transition them in. There isn't a lot of opportunity there. Could you add on storage facility? You could. But at the end of the day, the majority of service is actually downtown. So putting in a facility downtown makes a lot of sense from the operational savings, because every one of those buses that runs in from uptown to downtown costs you a half hour. That's an hour a day on every bus. And if you take that through the year, it's millions of dollars in terms of unproductive costs that you can mitigate. So the real point would be, and when you have a multiple garage operation, it's a very fluid operations, and things will move around. I won't, but some people in this room might, at some point, talking about a third garage.
Okay, appreciate that. So you're saying that because the storage facilities, and I believe you got land right adjacent to your property, right by the driveway, that you were looking at one point to do something when Don Hall was here. So that land is available for purchase or development. I'm not sure what the status of that is. It's not on a floodplain. It's right adjacent to Highway 6. So I don't know what the status of that is, but I guess I was looking at, here's the maintenance that you need and require for the service you have, and here's the storage that you need and require for the service. And I was just wondering if there's an ability to take advantage and be a little more frugal in that approach, but meet our needs. So there's a reason why I mention it. So the 50%, or sorry, 45%, help me understand. Population of Hamilton is about 520,000 people, thereabouts. Is that correct, to staff? Yep. Chair?
Yeah, 525,000.
125,000. Okay. So what percentage of the overall population currently is taking transit? Public transit.
I'm going to get you there now. The way that number is derived is we have 22 million rides, and you divide it by the population, and that'll give you your number.
Sorry, so
we have 22 million rides, and we have a population of 520,000. So 22,000 divided by 520. I can't do that math in my head, but it's something 40. I know 40.
But I appreciate, but that could be, you can have 10,000 people of 120,000 using up all that, taking all those rides. So it's not reflective of the percentage of actual individuals utilizing our transit system. So we have a number of how many people, not rides, because to me, that's a red herring. I want to know how many individuals we currently have on our transit system relative to our population. So it's per capita. So how many people are riding our transit system today?
So I don't know if I can defer this to a counselor or not, but anyway, so through the chair, I mean, so we don't traditionally measure that in transit, but this shows it at 7%. And our aspiration is 12%.
The way I read it, that's trips again. That's not individuals. Is that correct?
Yes, through the chair, I believe it might be. I'm not the author of this study.
I just want to put things in perspective, and I think it's helpful to know that we have 525,000 people in our community, and there's 1%, 2%, 5%, 10% individuals actually utilizing our public transit today. That's a benchmark for me, because then the question is, how do we move that ridership and individuals actually utilizing the system? So it's not about creating more rides for the same individuals. It's about getting new people on the system, and that's why I want that data. I don't see it reflected because we keep going to trips. But I'd be curious when I go out to my community and say that there's 5% of the people taking the transit system.
Yeah, I think, so through the chair, I think the only way we could come to some approximations, I think through, if I just go here to fares. So you see kind of, so monthly passes, if we know 40% of adults are using it, we can approximate, but we don't actually count. And I think the only way you could get that information is through some kind of survey.
Okay.
That could have statistical significance.
But would it be safe to say that we're probably looking at around, obviously less than 10% of our overall population is using the public transit system?
Through the chair, I couldn't estimate.
I wouldn't mind seeing that data. The next question is, 50% of the, or is it, sorry, 55% of the levy is funding the public transit system. Is that correct?
So just through the chair, with one qualification, funding the operating.
The operating, fair enough. And the other 45 is the fare box.
Through the chair, correct.
Okay. So currently, we have lane kilometers as a calculation for transit. Help me understand how that captures an individual that may take transit right across the city to McMaster University from whatever location. So I don't want to pick on anything. I just want to put the scenario that we know that people are taking transit from whatever community they may live. They're traveling and utilizing it through the whole community of Hamilton, but on their taxes, they're only paying for the lane kilometer. How do you capture the fact that they're using the whole system, and therefore the rest of us are subsidizing that individual because they're not paying for it?
Through the chair, so they do pay for capital, but I suppose that argument could be made the other way also. At the end of the day, on the operating side, the areas that are area rated pay the subsidy based on that proportion, and throughout the whole system it's inequitable. So that 45% is an average. So a route like King is probably around 60%. A smaller route is probably well less than that. Well, is well less than that. So I mean, it's not a perfectly equitable system. Again, it comes down to whether you use the system or not, you have value from it, from all those reasons I pointed to up front, whether it's economic growth, environment, health, social equity.
So I absolutely, through the chair, I absolutely agree. The reason I'm raising it is because at one point the formula I thought was more accurately reflected. That was, they had assessment lane kilometer, and somewhere to appease the politics of the day, they removed the assessment piece off the formula. There was a reason why that assessment piece was on that formula. I just want to highlight the reason was because the recognition that people that are using transit system more than likely will be using more kilometer lanes of transit than what they're actually paying for. We wanted a fair representation of those costs and that service being provided. And I just wanted to highlight that we can do better. But I want to also agree with your comment that I see transit as a public transit system is part of the lifeblood of a community. And we all have to get behind it, whether you got 100% service or not, because it is about the economics, it is about the nodes, it's about the corridors, it's about healthcare, it's about all those things. And so hopefully at some point we'll arrive at that point where we recognize that transit is our lifeblood, or part of our life, one of the main veins, and that we need to ensure that we fund it appropriately, because when we fund transit, we're funding economic growth and we're funding opportunity in our community. So I absolutely agree with those comments, and I will take the chair back. Thank you very much. Councillor Green.
Thank you very much. And I know there's lots of conversations.
Oh, sorry, you're right. Oh, that's right, that came from Councillor, I jumped at. I do have Councillor Jackson and I had Councillor Ferguson and Councillor Jackson.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Dave, when you quoted the mayor of Bogota at the start of your quote, was that Bogota, Colombia?
That's correct, through the chair, yes.
That's the only wealthy people, and at least when I was there, the only wealthy people in Colombia are drug lords.
He's an interesting man. He was pretty, since you asked me, I'm going to take it. No, through the chair, I really don't know a lot about Bogota. It's roughly an 8 million population. It's very progressive. It's very progressive on bikes as well. You know, his belief was a $300 bike should be equally valued as much as a $30,000 car in terms of movement through. He was, long before Paris, France did it this summer, he closed down the whole city and had a car-free day. So he's a pretty progressive thinker, depending on your perspective.
Well, when I was in Colombia, all I saw was chickens riding the buses, and just like you see in Romancing the Stone, they have the, people riding on the roof, and anyhow, it just seemed like a backwards country to be benchmarking off of.
So maybe
this
not.
to be humorous.
I think we'll give Councillor Ferguson an opportunity to.
Yeah, give me a lighten up, guys. It was supposed to be funny. And so my questions for you, first of all, to catch up on a couple of things. You mentioned the buses we approved at Public Works, the switch from diesel back to natural gas. That was the 14 buses, and none of them have been received yet?
Through the chair, none of them have been received, but we have received our first order of our TICs, which were replacement buses, which are gas.
Okay, is the compressed natural gas station up and running now?
Through the chair, yes, it is.
And it's at Upper James, is it?
It's on Upper James.
Okay, thank you. Back to 2016, this is today's GIC is about the 2016 budget. And as Councillor Collins says, you give us a lot to digest today. And so I'm just curious, for 2016, is he asked for $5 million in capital? Is that what I heard you say?
Through the chair, yes.
Okay, so why would you wait till 2 weeks after we approve the capital budget to come and ask for that?
Through the chair, I'm proposing that be financed through debt financing, which I understand to be on an operating account. So I maybe defer
It's also
to
said either way, it's going on the levy.
To Mike.
So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, in terms of the conversation, it's probably beneficial to have the conversation around the capital requirements in relation to the transit strategy. Had this come forward during the capital deliberations, you may not have had the opportunity to receive the content around the transit strategy and the status of the 10-year strategy and what's being proposed. So in terms of a perfect fit, it wouldn't have been a perfect fit in terms of, I appreciate the challenge, the capital budget, and then having a subsequent capital request. But again, staff can report back if the direction is to report back with options as it relates to 2016, any capital requirements, as well as the potential of deferring this to 2017. And finally, as it relates to the federal stimulus program, as we gain additional information, there may be a fit of these projects in relation to the federal stimulus program.
This is the second time I've experienced this. Other was the POA office, which was $30 million. And now this is just, the ink's not dry on the resolution yet at the council meeting to approve the 2016 capital budget. Expect that we would have seen something in there to identify it's coming, because we have lots of other capital demands. As you know, we have a forensic building that needs to be financed somehow also, and we talked about the debt financing for that for part of it. But so back to you, Mr. Chairman, to David. David, it's $5 million for 2016 plus the buses, or just $5 million for 2016 right now? Shouldn't say just. Is it?
Through the chair, it's both. Yes, the $5 million plus the not all buses, but the 11 buses that Metrolinx didn't finance.
Okay, but they're funded through the gas tax, aren't they, the 11?
Through the chair, no. So there's two gas taxes, one's federal and one's provincial. The provincial tax, 8.7 million, I think, goes to operating. The federal, which is around 30, we get 3 million to keep up with our replacement of buses. So, no, this would be, again, as I understood it, and I believe it was asked during the capital discussion about the buses for this plan, because they are going to be debt financed. It's an operating expense. But
Big Works approved, but a year ago, they're funded, aren't they?
the first 14, we were, as a matter of fact, in total, we were able to fit 45 buses into current funding envelopes. So
14 new, the balance of replacements,
the
I think.
14 of the 25 were funded.
Okay. So it's 11 more, not necessarily in 2016 as we grow the system, or as you said, the 7-year program.
Through the chair, it's 11 required in 16, 21 required over the next 9 years. So
where do you anticipate getting the funding for the buses for 2016? Is it coming from Metrolinx or is it coming from the levy?
No, through the chair, it's coming through the levy.
So what's the grand total? 5 million plus the buses is how much?
The buses are roughly 7 million.
You're looking for 12 million for 2016.
Through the chair, that's correct.
Weeks. It just seems strange to me, Mr. Chair. It comes in 2 weeks after we approve the capital budget. I'm trying to get my head around that. And Jerry has.
Yeah, I was going to say that Mike Zagaric, I think, explained it. Its problem is that it's deficit capital deficit financing 1 and 2. It ties into the 10-year plan, which is operational, and they go hand in hand. I think they are SMT, and I think maybe I'll go to, is it Jerry? Respond to that, but I think I understand the point they're making. Jerry?
So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, in terms of the 2 capital updates that you received today as it relates to the transit strategy, the 11 buses are part of your referred. You'll recall late in January, I provided an overview of 18 referred items that total approximately $7 million in net operating impacts. The 11 buses are one of those 18 referred items. What's before you in terms of that referred item is, I believe, a purchase of 11 buses at just short of $7 million, with each bus having about a 12-year life. And so what staff are putting before you as a referred item is to debt finance each one of those buses over the 12-year life, and that represents, I believe, somewhere in the area of $770,000 in annual operating pressures. So again, that item is before committee as one of the referred items, one of the 18, and it's grown slightly, I believe, by 2 additional referred items. Yes. And then in terms of the additional information presented today as it relates to the maintenance facility, the $5 million is, if directed, staff could report back with options in terms of that financing strategy.
Okay. And so is this big numbers? The $5 million for the other capital, is it in one of those 18 or 20 items also?
For you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, it is not. So it would represent an incremental ask over and above the approved capital budget, as well as what has been presented to date in terms of the operating pressures, including those 18 referred items.
Okay, I'm touch worried, Mr. Chairman, that we're misleading the public with this 2.1% when we haven't seen these 20 other things and which ones will survive. I hope we're going to get to that pretty soon, so we have the real number. When are you going to have those before us, Mike, in budget deliberations?
So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, in terms of our budget schedule, the departmental presentations are scheduled to come to an end this week. I would be before committee on February 12th to present additional information as it relates to those referred items, and then back before committee on February 19th to discuss any further amendments to our 2016 operating budget. So the February 12th date we've earmarked for the referred items.
Okay. This is coming as a bit of a sticker shock to me again today. But, Mr. Chairman, one last comment, and I'm going to, as the mayor says, put my oar in the water. It seems if we're going to take LRT down to the waterfront, we have a public works yard not far away that is not required anymore. You know, just my view would be, less costly to get the maintenance facility there than running track from King Street all the way down north of Barton to Wentworth. And I am pleased that you finally considered moving the bus barn back into Wentworth Street, because that's what it was built for. And I'm not sure how you spend $25 million when it was built for buses, but we can have that conversation later. And we're not going to spend that in 2016. We're here to talk about 2016 right now. But just food for thought. Thanks.
Thank you. I think Councillor Collins has a motion coming forward when we finish the questions. So I do have Councillor Jackson.
Thanks, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Good presentation, Director Dixon, and you've dropped a lot of information on us today. So obviously, lots of stuff to take under advisement and refer to staff. Quickly to slide 45, Dave, please, and just a few questions, and for my edification and for some clarification. So the final 3 bullet points there of what we approved in the 15 budget. And if you said it 10 times, forgive me, because I didn't hear it clearly enough for my sake. Are all 3 bullet points 50 FTEs, procurement of the 25 new buses, delayed retirement of the old buses? That's all been done. Mr. Deputy Mayor, through to Dave.
Through the chair, it's being phased in at roughly 1/3 of each of those, as shown in the top 3 bullets. So roughly, on an annualized basis, obviously depending on when you put it into the year, it's less. But on an annualized basis, we put the first third of that in September of 15. We're about to put the second third in March of 16. And the final third will go in September of 16.
But Dave, none of that's contingent upon 16 funding, is it?
It is in the sense that, through the chair, that we only have 14 of those 25 buses funded. So the key to even do this, which this is independent of, we can do this without having a garage, obviously, but we need to have 11 more buses. So we need to fund 11 more buses, or clearly we can't put in the September 16 ads.
So, Dave, forgive me if I'm a little slow here. Let me just rewind the tape about a year. I supported 50 more bus drivers. That's basically the FTEs, might be a couple of maintenance people. I supported getting 25 more new buses purchased. And if you need to delay the old ones till you got the new ones, whatever, and we're off to the races. Now, I'm not hearing that today. Did I miss something from what I approved last year, Mr. Deputy Mayor?
Through the chair, so you approved last year, that is correct, but you approved, if you see in 1C, the 25 buses in green was the portion to be funded by Metrolinx, and Metrolinx did not fund that. So because we didn't get any of the funding request, we are short that $7 million to buy those vehicles.
So, thank you for that clarification. Why are you putting that back on us? Why aren't we through the mayor's office, possibly re-requesting it through Metrolinx in light of public transit dollars that are still seeming to be forthcoming out of the Wynne government and possibly with the new federal government? Why are you automatically putting it back on us, Mr. Deputy Mayor? Through to Dave.
Through the chair. So we could do that. It is highly unlikely that the province is going to fund buses. They're, generally very few people are in the rail business. Everybody's in the bus business. And I think they're very concerned about a precedence. And in many ways, I think that was some of the reason they went the direction they went. Just my knowledge in history of provincial funding, very unlikely the province, they did get in the bus funding business for a while.
Like with the PST, if I recall, and things like that.
Well, with the Ontario Municipal Bus Funding Program, they got out of that, and that's where we actually, the sum of money Jerry's talking about, when that ended, we put that in. So highly unlikely they are going to fund Hamilton in isolation, and highly unlikely they're going to start a new bus replacement or a bus purchase program.
Okay, I appreciate that. That's a bureaucratic, sincere response. I just don't think politically we should give up on that. Dave, on the mountain, last couple of years, we approved additional buses, extension of routes, Stone Church primarily, Rymal primarily, better running times, evenings, weekends. How are we doing with that, Mr. Deputy Mayor? Through to Dave.
So through the chair, they continue to operate. They continue to perform well, but until we get passenger counters, we haven't done any actual counts on what our loading is. So again, moving forward, any service in the city will be based on those service standards that you proposed, and anything that deviates from that would need to come back to council for you to approve that deviation.
Dave, just on that, and then if you quickly move over to slide 58, but just before I leave that thought, as you're moving over to slide 58, please. From time to time, my constituents tell me, Dave, that they see empty buses on some routes. Now, you know your system, you've got your managers in place, and I'm not here to take away what we've achieved with extended routes, such as Rymal Stone Church. But if there are routes where there are empty buses, you must go through some rationalization to saying, you know what, that bus has been empty now 3 months in a row on that particular street and road, and we've got buses passing people by on whatever the busiest corridors are, the B lines, whatever. Mr. Deputy Mayor, through to Dave for a comment, please. Do you go through that exercise?
Through the chair, we have not gone through that exercise in my tenure.
Okay.
And we really don't have the ability, other than the IBI study that was done in 2009, you need counts. So we are putting automated passenger counters on a subset of the fleet. When we have those numbers, which we will rapidly be able to get, then we will do that on probably a biannual basis. That's not something generally done every month kind of thing.
Okay.
You look at it, and what you're talking about here is a productivity standard. So we're going to look at those numbers, and if we aren't getting 15 people boarding, then we will indeed look at reallocating that fleet, subject to the other standards here.
Okay, fair enough, Dave. Fast forward to 58, please. Just curious, Dave, $10 million worth of shelter requirements. I think before you arrived 2-3 years ago, I remember we gave X amount of dollars. I think we caught up with about 50 or 60 shelter backlog locations. You still got $10 million worth of locations. How many locations roughly does that represent? And can you explain that, please, Mr. Deputy Mayor?
So through the chair, so we really have two types of shelters, and this is the type of shelter that I am not proposing we pursue at this time. But these are large, so we have a conventional transit shelter that's roughly 10 to 15,000 a shelter, and the shelters that these represent are shelters that are in the order of 100,000 each that would be put on, for instance, the Mohawk campus is going to get these shelters. The terminal at the MTC will get these shelters. So these were to be associated with the blast line, and the ones I just referenced came through Metrolink's quick wins money. So I am saying at this point, they are not affordable, and I am not proposing moving forward on them.
On these more super shelters?
On the super shelters.
Okay, so that's not displacing, though, because I know in my ward I've still got a list of pursuing for my constituents the normal type of smaller shelters. You still got that list, I hope.
Through the chair, we do, yours and many others.
Okay, thank you. I'm so glad you recognized mine. Thanks so much, Dave. Fast forwarding, Mr. Deputy Mayor, quickly to 59. The next slide, Dave, please. So, Dave, let me understand that bullet point there, city costs offset by water funding, 18 million. Are you borrowing 18 million from Hamilton Water?
So through the chair, as I understand it, and I don't know if Dan's still here, I'm not sure he ever was here today, but anyways, at any rate, so water also needs to expand facilities. They have some allocation available as well. The current land that they are on could be sold, and so that generates the 18 million that I got from Dan.
Okay.
Terry Davis, did you want to?
That's news to me that Dan potentially had 18 million to loan to HSR. Mr. Deputy Mayor, through to Jerry, please.
So through the chair to Councillor Jackson, the money from Hamilton Water isn't for transit. It's for towards a new public works yard. The intent is to collapse some of the operations right now, bring them all into one to become more efficient. Dan has yards in East Stony Creek, in Dundas, and Hamilton. He could be more efficient if he could collapse into one site for storing of equipment and materials. So that's he set that money aside in his budget. It's not for HSR, but it is for a public works yard overall for all the operations.
Okay, Jerry, I think I followed that explanation, but the HSR director has somehow used it, I take it favorably, towards his presentation today. So is there a link, or there really isn't a link?
So the link is, so 100 million, so it's going to cost the city 25 million to upgrade Wentworth.
Yes?
100 million, 1/3 of the city cost is 33 million. But you would have 18 million available from water, so the city potential is 40 million.
Okay, Dave, all right.
So that's if a new operations facility, which we've estimated at a very high level, is in the order of $100 million. That's if 25 million of upgrades is enough for Wentworth.
Yeah.
Even though Councillor Ferguson thinks that's a large number, we'll be lucky.
Okay. I need to have a little chit-chat with Hamilton Water Service Senior Director Dan McKinnon, but that'll be after today. Okay, so David, let me clearly understand. We've got Mountain Transit Center. You want a return of 330 Wentworth Street North to HSR. And you want a Works Operations Center. You hypothetically, ideally want three facility locations, Mr. Deputy Mayor, through to Dave. Have I interpreted that correctly?
Through the chair, I want Wentworth Garage or a new garage. I need two operating facilities.
Oh, so Wentworth and Mountain will do for you?
Will do for me.
You don't need also a Works Operations Center?
I do not need a Works Operations Center, but if I'm going to take Wentworth Garage, my colleagues are going to need a place to work.
That's fair. And by the way, is there not a domino effect? Where are we putting the darts fans and the darts inventory? Aren't they currently at 330 Wentworth North?
Yes, they are, through the chair.
Well, I didn't see any darts thing up there.
So
We'll get to that later.
So,
thanks, Mr. Deputy Mayor. You've made enough trouble today. David, would you answer my would you answer my question, please, David?
So through the chair, they could be accommodated there. Through the chair, they could be accommodated there.
They could be accommodated there under your scenario of having that second transit center also at 330. You would cohabitate that location.
Through the chair, they could for some period of time.
Oh, nice little caveat there, David. Okay. All right. And last, David, on slide 66, where you've ended up recommendations, David, you understand that we just need a lot more time to mulch and digest this and take it under advisement and see what the ramifications are. Mr. Deputy Mayor, through to Director Dixon, you understand that?
Through the chair, I understand.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
So now I have Councillor Green, second time, Mr. Mayor, second time, and Councillor Merla. Are you first time? Sorry. So will you bump to the top, Councillor Merla?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dave, many thanks for what I truly believe is a very thorough and almost thinking outside of the box type of approach to trying to find a solution to an array of problems or presenting problems that we have. And in saying that, however, I'm a little bit, I guess, confused as to some of the methods in which we're financing this when we're bridging multiple departments for public transit. Now, I presume through you, Mr. Chairman, that Dan McKinnon has been part of this discussion with respect to the budgetary allocation from water. Is that correct?
Through the chair, Dan McKinnon and John Mader were involved in these discussions, and as I understand it, and Jerry could probably further define, they have been looking for some time for a different or an additional worksite capability for operations.
Okay. So it's a hybrid type of model where you're going to incorporate a public transit use as well as a water use. Is that correct?
Through the chair, no. We are going to, what we are saying is if we take back Wentworth Garage, currently it is fully utilized by operations, water, fleet, a number of other departments. And if we are going to use it, they will need to go elsewhere. And this is really about building them a facility elsewhere and at the same time addressing all the needs that they are already pursuing. So in essence, you solve the greater public works issues as well as transit issues.
Okay. And what stage of the process, the budgetary process, is this presently then? Is this simply a concept for information purposes only to be then worked out with our finance department and ultimately council?
Through the chair, so I think it is at this point an information and kind of a get a sense of what we need to do, and I think it's also got to be put in context of the greater city needs. But I do not see that we are going to run out of space. We can limp along for a few years. We are going to run out of space, which will then cripple your ability to add anything to the transit system. And the only way I think to do this is we need to build a facility. I am saying we asked Metrolinx to do it. My second alternative is let's ask all three levels of government. But I fully recognize you have many other issues to consider, and this may or may not be in your highest priority, but recognize that without it, the city's transit system will be paralyzed in a few years.
But I guess just as a disclaimer to you, Mr. Chairman, see, I don't want people leaving here today thinking that this is a done deal. I think this is really at the preliminary stages in the event that it's reported as something that we are indeed definitively pursuing. At this point, it's conceptual. Is that correct?
So through the chair, I would say even more so. I mean, what I'm really asking $5 million for, and I'm not certain that's the right number, but it's really to start down and do those definitive studies that will tell us where we need to go and allow us to position ourselves should the federal interest align with the provincial interest in helping municipalities in terms of transit across this province.
Well, again, it's more of a theory or a concept as opposed to anything concrete at this point. We know what the presenting problem is, and what you're doing is addressing it through a plan of action that needs to be implemented.
Through the chair, that's correct.
Okay, just for the record, I think we need to clarify that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I have Councillor Green.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Mayor. I just wanted to take a moment and address my point of order from an earlier statement that was made, and state that if you want to be funny using stereotypes, don't. A statement was made that a country was backwards, so I'll use that statement as a teachable moment when in fact Colombia has a GDP of 4.68% versus Canada's 2.02%. They have a GDP per capita of 3.34 to Canada's 0.86. Industrial production growth is 4.8, ours is 3.7. Industrial value add, 37% to our 27%. Manufacturing value add, 12% to our GDP's 10%. Agricultural value add, 6% to our country's 1%. So I bring that point of order up because during Pan Am's, when we invite countries to visit Hamilton based on Deloitte's presentation on our opportunities for strategic growth, and we invite Latin American countries to Canada. I can remember Colombia being one of them. We want to make sure that people watching and listening, as well as Colombians here in Hamilton, understand that we fully respect their contribution to our city and understand their economic situation vis-a-vis Canada and the globe. So having stated that, I'll go back to my questions regarding this presentation. If you can just for a moment, Mr. Deputy Mayor, through you to Mr. Dixon, just talk a little bit about the investments or lack thereof perhaps in some of the previous years of council over the last 10 years. Maybe actually, instead of through you, if I could put that question to Mr. Zagaric. How has Hamilton funded transit in previous terms of council? Are we playing catch up, is it safe to say?
So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, in terms of our financing strategy, it has been a balance and not an equal balance between levy and fare box revenues, as well as levy dedicated for capital. I can't recall the exact year, but Dave made reference to the province of Ontario getting out of the Ontario bus replacement program. The City of Hamilton was a recipient of $3.7 million under that program. So when that program came to an end, we had to find a financing source for that. The financing source was gas tax revenues. About $3 million in federal gas tax revenues is being applied towards the replacement of buses, and the balance $700,000 from the capital levy. So our funding sources are levy for both operating and capital, as well as fare box revenues, and finally federal gas tax funding. And provincial gas tax funding of approximately $10 million.
But I guess what I'm trying to understand is in previous terms of council, we were council was very lean in terms of percentage rate increases. We had a couple of 0 years. Was there then deferred maintenance or deferred investments in transit during those terms of council?
So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, in terms of the bus replacements for existing service levels, our financing strategy was meeting the existing service levels, but did not provide for any capacity to amend the service levels, either to add new routes or to improve the service level on existing routes. So as a result, if you go back in terms of the fare box revenues, there was some deferral of those increases, which related to more of a pressure on the levy.
Now, I can understand that. I can understand that model in terms of having riders have their fair share. And we've heard that around the table in terms of having ridership pay for through the fare boxes. But using that same logic, I think back to the early, or I should say mid-2000s, with Toronto's $64 million vehicle registration tax. And using that same logic, I'm not proposing that we reintroduce that here today, but using that same logic, could we not then extend that to say that if cars are using roads and they should pay a $60 a year registration tax, which based on our own monthly fees is nothing compared to what people pay for buses, to help with some of our deferred costs on road infrastructure? What would that represent?
So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I haven't come across any estimate as to how that particular tool, which currently isn't available to municipalities in Ontario other than the City of Toronto. But again, I'm not familiar as to what that tool may generate in revenue. The only tool that I am familiar with is a land transfer tax.
And so is there any way for us, and this is just for argument, this is just to put things into context when we talk about user fees, when we talk about people paying their fair share. Could we find out how many cars are registered in Hamilton? Who would we ask for that? Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, to any members. Would that be the Ministry of Ontario Transport?
For you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I would guess it would be MTO in terms of license registrations.
I would be very interested then when we're having this conversation, branding about the riders' fair share, when we talk about ridership, that we do it in context with the amount of cars that are on the road, trucks that are on the road. I know previous members of council had talked about registering cars for some of our infrastructure use, just so that taxpayers, when they're hearing the full story, they keep that in mind. that a modest $60 a year vehicle registration tax, I think, would vastly or greatly help us with some of our road deficits if we're going to extend that same logic. If not, if we view the general levy as a place where we fund transit and we fund roads on the general levy equal, ceteris paribus for everybody, then we need to take that argument off the line. So I'll just put it out there. It's not that I'm here to reintroduce or to introduce or ask for vehicle registration. I just want to make sure that when we're having that conversation, that we're including the possibility of that, just to see dollars to dollars what that might make up for. Thank you for your indulgence, Mr. Deputy Mayor. That's all.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor.
Very quickly, thank you again, Dave. Slide 59, just for the benefit of making sure we've got clear language here. So when you're talking about works yard, you're talking about public works yard. You're not talking about a transit yard, right?
Through the chair, that is correct.
Okay, so could I recommend that you put public works yard in these documents from here on in? Because I think it's confused a few people that it's actually transit related when it's not. You're talking about two separate entities. Public works yard, which is going to be required if GO or someone else picks up the Wentworth yard as a terminal for LRT or whatever, then we'll need another public works yard somewhere, and we'll also need a transit storage facility.
Through the chair, that is correct.
Two separate things. Right.
Correct.
So let me just recommend that you put the Public Works Operations Center on there so that we don't get confused, because it's not a transit. And the one that needed to hear that most isn't here, but I'll tell them later. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm going to ask Councillor Pearson to take the chair. I mean, I just listened to a profound philosophical discussion, and I'm sitting back here awed because I'm trying to understand from a cost perspective how much GDP is produced in Hamilton in respect to movement of services and goods. Do we have an estimate? Well, whoever could answer that question. I didn't want to get into this philosophical argument, but the reality is, if you cut roads out, you don't have an economy. So I'm not all that married to looking or even entertaining a further tax on vehicles in this community, period. So I want to put it in perspective that vehicles also contribute to our movement of goods, they contribute to our GDP, and they contribute through gas tax. They contribute through taxes on vehicles that get taxed over and over and over again. That goes into the general revenue. So there's plenty of dollars. Let's get into the number of garages that are located providing jobs in this community. Let's get into all the other ancillary activities as a result of the vehicle that brings taxes to the community. If we want to have this philosophical debate, I'll have it any day. Thank you. So I'll take the chair back. Move to receive the presentation. Moved by Mr. Mayor, second by Councillor Pearson. All those in favor?
Carried.
Now I'm going to move to Councillor Collins.
I just want to first preface my comments with something to do with process here. This is the second year in a row that we're entertaining committee work at a budget meeting. So the transit strategy should have been proposed as part of a GIC session. I don't know who scheduled it as part of today's debate. There's certainly people, I think, in the community who'd probably want to come in and present as delegations for or against some of the things that we're entertaining today. And that's, I really think that today's meeting should have focused squarely on the public works budget. And this, while it has implications to the budget, has nothing to do with the departmental presentations. Same as the next thing that we're going to deal with in terms of the DARTS, how that made it onto the budget process agenda, I'll never know. I'm asking, though, that Jerry and Mr. Murray and others, maybe even through the clerk's department, can convene to ensure that we set some guidelines in terms of not distracting us from what is a very important process that we have related to the budget. And unfortunately, these issues, while very important, should be scheduled at a different time to allow people to come in and participate with public delegations and other things which are not allowed during these budget meetings. So I say that just as a preface to my motion that I'm going to make here, and that is that I'm going to refer the presentation, Mr. Dixon's presentation, to finance staff for review and a report on the short, medium, and long-term capital and operating budget implications, including debt financing and area rating implications.
Thank you. That's been duly moved and seconded. I'm going to ask Councillor Pearson to take the chair for a moment. I think that was part of my frustration when I looked at it, was that I was trying to figure out how this fit into the actual budget process as we move forward. And I absolutely agree with Councillor Collins that there's a number of groups that are concerned about what's being proposed, and normally that takes place through the appropriate committee, and that in this case would be Public Works. And yet we're doing this under the auspices of the budget process, which do not allow direct input in regards to the reports being provided to us, because they'll have another later date. So there's no. So, I mean, I'm getting questions left, right, and center, and it's difficult to ask those questions because it's not the format to be dealing with these issues. So I concur with those comments, and I hope that SMT will take another look at this issue. Budgets should be just budgets, and for any change in direction or new things coming on board, that really is a discussion that should be done at the appropriate committee, or even the regular GIC where people can provide. So I support the referral motion, and on the next subject matter, it's the same dilemma. So I take the chair back, and we have any more comments on this referral? Councillor Murillo.
Actually, along the same lines, Councillor Collins didn't include the next presentation. I think it would be prudent for us GIC. I think it's important. Afternoon after days of committee meetings. So that would be my suggestion. I think it might be unfair to those that have been present here all day, particularly those people with disabilities that have sat here, but I hope they understand it's better to do this early with a plan of action that's conducive to a fair process.
I appreciate that. I'm going to look to our staff and I'll look at the people that have been waiting here all day. The issue here, from my perspective, is it's a one-way discussion. If we move it to a special GIC, it's a multiple conversation that takes place. So not only will we have the report before us, but for those who have concerns and wishes, whether it's CUPE or whether it's any other organization, will also be able to participate as this report comes forward, and you get a more robust debate and discussion as opposed to just having a presentation without any input, any other input. So I'm going to look to the will of this council, and all due respect, I think it's be more comprehensive for anyone in the audience to have that approach.
You have my motion first.
Sorry.
So
I think you were looking for a supplementary.
At the appropriate time, I will be moving that subsequent to Councillor Collins' motion.
Okay, fair enough.
It could be added as a friendly amendment. I don't mind in this motion.
Okay, let's do this. We'll do it as a separate motion. Let's go back to Councillor Collins' motion as worded. No further discussion. All those in favour? Carried. Any opposed? Carried. Now I'll recognize Councillor Murillo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just with respect to the next item, I think it would be prudent for us to schedule a special GIC to deal with the darts issue. That's moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Collins. And also, obviously, entertain public delegations.
Okay, so the motion is we move it to a special GIC where that presentation will be made by staff, and those who wish to speak to that presentation will accept delegations. Correct?
That's correct. And that the darts issue be the sole issue on the agenda.
Thank you. So that's the motion on the table. Moved to second. Any further discussion? Stephanie?
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, just to clarify for all those that are public, if you wish to speak as a delegation, since a lot of you are here, you can either contact the clerk's office or go online. There is a delegation request form, and we will list you appropriately as well.
Thank you. So we do have a motion duly put on the table. Eddie, I don't see any further discussion. Mr. Mayor.
So I don't disagree with that, but I guess that leads to an awful lot of frustration for people that have been sitting here for hours, awaiting this particular issue. And so here's my question. Did any of this go to the senior management team? Because normally when reports get vetted, they get vetted. We have a senior management team to actually vet reports and then decide where it's to go and what committee is to be presented to. So, I understand that this has a budgetary impact, but I mean, the last time we dealt with transit was about a year ago. last budget round. So we've had since then till now to deal with any of these issues at Public Works at any point in time. I don't understand why it's here before us today. So could we just get a clearer sense of how it got here so we can at least give folks here some sense of comfort that the next time we get together, it's going to be clearly, a singular issue, and that we're not going to have another kind of process issue come at us that will cause us to delay it again. So whoever wants to answer that. Jerry?
Through the chair, and going through the 10-year strategy and the ATS, because of the magnitude of the files, we thought bringing it forward as part of the budget process and knowing that it would be for information purposes only and then going forward. We didn't prepare separate reports with these two presentations similar to the departmental presentation. We put them in that order because they were significant. They will have a significant impact. We've showed the proposals as enhancements, but we didn't do a separate report on this. We wanted to get information back from the committee and forward with direction. So that's why there was no reports, and we lumped them all as part of the Public Works process today.
Okay, I hear you. I'm not sure it's the best approach to take, but given that, are you then going to be creating reports so that the next time we deal with this, that we'll have a fulsome report that people can see ahead of time, appreciate, understand, and put it in report form rather than in slide deck form?
Yeah. So through the chair, for those GICs, we'll have staff reports with recommendations for committee to review.
All right. So on that basis, I think, apologize for the folks that have been here patiently. I think that's very, very unfortunate. But in the fullness of it, if we get a report that people can put their minds to and hands to well beforehand, and then have an opportunity to delegate, I think we're all going to be better off. So on that basis, I'll support that. But with apologies to the people that are here that spent a good part of their afternoon waiting for this report. I think that's very unfortunate, and I apologize. I'm sorry.
Thank you. So I have no other speakers around the table on this particular motion. I also want to extend my deepest appreciation to each and every one of you that came out and spent the whole afternoon waiting for it. Thank you for your patience, and you will be notified of the next meeting. And any one that has an interest to go further and provide delegation, Stephanie's already provided how you could do that. You can actually make a presentation in response to what's before us this afternoon. So at this point, all those in favor? Any opposed? Carried. So at this point, Madam Clerk, we will entertain a motion to adjourn. Is that correct?
No, excuse me, through Mr. Deputy Mayor. No, there is
Reviewing,
item
yes.
7.1.
Councillor Jackson.
No, you're not good.
No, thank you. Yes, thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Moved by myself, seconded by yourself, Mr. Deputy Mayor, to refer the Vista Viewing Maintenance request as an enhancement to the February 12th GIC budget meeting to be discussed with all the other enhancements. Moved by myself, seconded by yourself, Mr.
Thank
Deputy
you.
Mayor.
All those in favor? Any opposed? Carried. General information, seeing none, right? Chris, do you have anything? No. So we move to motion to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Connolly, seconded by Councillor Pearson. All those in favor? Carried. Thank you.
All right.